It's not like he was isekai just once. He's been summoned so many times that traveling to other worlds has become his daily routine. Every time he was summoned, a piece of his humanity was stripped away until eventually he just stopped caring. The system that summoned him tried to create a balance but failed. Now they're both finally stuck in the same world. His stats have degraded to an almost illegal level. But this time he hasn't come to be a hero. He's here to put a proper end to everything. This isn't an adventure anymore. This is the end. Let's begin. One day, Takafuji Inori had a dream about a girl. He reached out to touch her face and whispered her name. She clearly knew him, but he had no idea who she was. Then she suddenly stabbed him in the chest with a dagger. He looked at her face, wondering why she was crying and how he even knew her name. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his classroom, filled with the familiar voices of his classmates. He stared blankly for a moment, thinking, was that a dream? Then looked around. It was his usual classroom on a perfectly ordinary day, or so it seemed at first glance. Suddenly a magic circle materialized on the floor. A brilliant light erupted from the circle, dazzling everyone. When they opened their eyes again, they were somewhere else entirely. Standing in a vast white space, the MC looked around, recalling that he'd just been in school a moment ago. His classmates were terrified. One of them stammered, "Is this a prank? Where are we?" Just then, a goddess appeared before them. She told them not to worry, explaining that their souls had embarked on a journey, or more precisely, they had entered a spiritual realm. She introduced herself as what they would call a goddess. They weren't just being sent to another world. They were being summoned as heroes to defeat the Demon King. As they stared in shock, the goddess explained that their souls would be sent to a world of swords and magic, to the kingdom of Heian. Inori thought to himself that this was exactly like the stories he'd read. The goddess told him not to worry. No one would be able to stop them there. They would be departing for the new world soon, but first she had a gift for them. She extended her hand to each of them, bestowing upon them an ability suited for the world she was sending them to. She warned them not to become drunk on their newfound power, urging them to follow the right path and guide others. She wished them the best of luck and sent them on their way. Opening his eyes, the MC found himself in a throne room. He was surrounded by knights, nobles, the king himself, and the saintess, who performed the summoning. The saintess sighed in relief, delighted that the ritual was a success, as the nobles praised her. They praised her purity, celebrating that the heroes had finally been summoned, and the world would now be saved. The king, who had been silent on his throne, finally rose. He stood up and approached the summoned students. "I am the king of the Heian kingdom," he introduced himself. He welcomed them graciously and pleaded for their help in defeating the Demon King. Inori and his classmates respectfully knelt before him. One of his classmates addressed the king. "Your Majesty, we appreciate the welcome. Please allow us to raise our heads." He then added that he had a question. "Will we be able to return to our own world?" The king replied, "The saintess will answer that question for you." The saintess stepped forward and explained that there would be a chance to return, but not immediately. In exactly 1 month, on the next full moon, a portal to your world can be opened. If you do not wish to fight the Demon King, she continued, you are free to spend that month here in the palace. One of the girls was thrilled at the prospect of living in a palace. The MC, however, felt this was less of a summoning and more like a package tour to another world. Another girl asked how much time would pass in their world during that month. The saintess reassured them, telling them not to worry. You will be sent back to the exact moment you were summoned, she explained. Time in your world will not have moved at all. Inori sensed that something was off. Everything seemed perfect and accommodating, a little too perfect. The saintess clarified that they didn't have to fight and that the kingdom had no right to stop them from leaving. Although, she added, we truly hope you will choose to save our country. Please save our world. She clasped her hands together and began to cry. The MC thought to himself that this was the part where they'd all naively declare themselves great heroes. It's such a cliched trick to motivate people. His classmates started whispering among themselves. He just hoped none of them were foolish enough to fall for this obvious trap. After their discussion, one of his classmates spoke up. We don't think we can make a final decision just like that. Could we please have that month to consider it? The king was silent for a moment, considering the request. Inori glanced at his classmates, thinking it was a good idea. He supported it, and thankfully, the king agreed. In 1 month, you must all decide, the king declared, whether you will become heroes or return to your own world. But for tonight, we have prepared a feast. Please enjoy yourselves. The students were overjoyed. The MC sighed with a smile, thinking how lucky he was. He was getting to taste delicious food on his very first day in another world. He wanted to try something interesting. something with a lot of different ingredients mixed together. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared beneath his feet, just like the one back in the classroom. He touched his chin in confusion, wondering if this was how they were getting to the dining hall. He then began to wonder about the capacity of this magic. Could it be used to gather all kinds of delicious food, he mused. He really wanted to taste the food of a fantasy world. One of his classmates called out in alarm, "Hey, why is the magic circle only under you?" The MC was completely baffled. Then he was taken back to the same place. The goddess welcomed him and began her usual welcome speech. But she trailed off, feeling it was a bit awkward, with only one person there. Inori pointed out that they were late because they had just seen each other a few minutes ago. She pointed at him in confusion, saying that he had already been there before. This surprised her even more, since this wasn't supposed to happen, and she asked if he'd been summoned again. He figured that must be it. She then extended her hands toward him and said that rules are rules. Since he was summoned, he had to receive a gift. The magic circle appeared beneath his feet again, as she called it a mysterious case. She wished him goodbye and good luck, and he muttered that it seemed she wasn't doing her job right. And just like that, he was transported to a laboratory in another world. He noticed that the last summoning circle was purple, but this one was pale with different markings. However, now wasn't the time to think about that. That was because he was tied to a chair and surrounded by a couple of mad scientists. The old man was thrilled that the summoning was a success, and his companion announced that their new subject was experiment number 12. The old man leaned closer to Inori, saying he might finally get a real magical eye. The MC suspected the experiment wouldn't end well, and started to wonder if this was his second time being brought to this world. Would this be too much for him? The two scientists picked up their tools, and the old man reminded his companion that the experiment was the top priority and must be handled with caution. She called him doctor and said she understood perfectly. The MC wondered if the guy was really a doctor. He looked more like a mad scientist. The old man suddenly brandished a knife in front of his face, crying tears of joy, and said that he had finally obtained a genuine magical eye. It's something you get when people from other worlds cross the border. He then revealed a full set of tools he had hidden in his clothes. He said that this was their job. Inori figured that his gift must be the magical eye. The old man cast a spell on him, explaining that it would be a shame if he went mad or became uncontrollable. So he was going to hypnotize him to prevent any disruptions to the experiment. The MC kept his gaze fixed on the magical circle in front of him. But despite the old man's best efforts, the hypnosis had no noticeable effect. This shocked him, and he grumbled that he never imagined even his best hypnosis would perform so poorly. Suddenly, his companion called out to him, saying the subject's right eye was an all-seeing eye and his left eye was an eye of creation. Hearing this, the old man was overjoyed. It was a sample that came in two different types. Forgetting the hypnosis, he decided to continue the experiment to see how he would react, and they readied their medical equipment again. Inori panicked, wondering if they were actually going through with this. Were they just going to dissect him without any hypnosis? Was this just torture? He had to do something. He decided to use his eyes to try and escape, and at that exact moment, a green magical circle appeared. The two mad doctors just stared in surprise while he smiled, thinking to himself what perfect timing it was. When he arrived back at the goddess's domain, she looked a little surprised. He noted that this was the third time. Was he just that drawn to her? He asked her what was happening, and the goddess told him this was the first time anything like this had occurred. So she couldn't say much, but she hoped that by the next time he appeared, they would have some answers. The MC thought he was getting pretty good at befriending the goddess, but why was she already talking about the next time he appeared? This time he was summoned by a rich girl and a fairy. The woman informed her mistress that she had succeeded in summoning a human-like monster. He had talent all right, but he didn't appreciate her calling him a monster. He was mistaken for a monster and was nearly forced into signing a service contract. Then suddenly the summoning circle appeared once more. He returned to the goddess and took a deep breath. Seeing her was something he felt he could never get tired of. He asked if she knew the reason for all this yet, and she said she didn't have much time, so she'd give him the short version. A powerful summoning call seeks out a person with a strong soul. A strong soul is necessary to cross the boundaries between worlds. But his soul was exceptionally strong. She looked at him with surprise and said that he wasn't just a saint, but a good person as well. She noted that was a difficult thing to be, but he replied that it didn't matter. Simply put, what mattered was his inner strength. If his soul had been instantly secured with a contract by a hero in that world, this wouldn't have kept happening. She extended her hand toward him and gave him another ability, the ability to steal. This time he was summoned by a beautiful girl, and he finally had 4 gifts. He tried to make a contract with the goddess before she could send him away, but the magic circle closed too quickly. On the 5th summon, a girl used black magic to call him. Apparently his gift was somehow connected to it. On the 6th call, he was resurrected by his faithful demons and successfully became their king. But he was quickly returned to the goddess, who noted that he had collected quite a few of her gifts. He agreed, and the goddess told him that the next time would be the last. So for his final gift, she would let him combine all his skills together. When he was summoned, he would need to check the system immediately to understand what the goddess meant. This time he found himself armed with swords in a world of magic. When he saw the king and heard the voice welcoming the heroes, he was relieved, thinking everything would be fine this time. But then he saw 3 high school strangers next to him. The sight of the students left him utterly confused. He shakily looked around, trying to make sense of the situation. He couldn't figure out how they had gotten into the palace. Meanwhile, Karasawa Tamaki recognized the other girls and immediately went over to them. With them was another girl named Ovi. Seeing all 4 of them, the king was confused, because there were supposed to be only 3 heroes. Hearing this, Inori realized there were 4 people, and 3 of them knew each other. He blurted out, wondering aloud if he was supposed to be grouped with them too. At his outburst, everyone turned to him. Someone asked, 3 heroes and 1 ordinary man. The MC confirmed that seemed to be the case. Surprised, he asked what it meant that he had been grouped with the others. Just then, the king's daughter Amanda arrived. She turned to the heroes and asked if they had come from another world. She declared that, as the first princess, she herself had summoned them, so they should be grateful to her. The MC thought to himself, great, another arrogant princess. She raised her hand and declared seriously, I have summoned you to our shining kingdom of the rising sun. She explained that in this world they would meet not only humans but also demi-humans and demons, and that the demons were their enemies. Led by the Demon King, she continued, they have created their own country and are attacking our territory. Therefore, the main force of the Mard Empire requested that heroes be summoned from all countries. But as it turns out, only girls with royal blood can be heroes. Every country is building an army and training its heroes to fight against the Demon King. She smiled and asked them how they liked her plan, certain that her idea was brilliant. Inori looked at her with suspicious eyes, thinking that they weren't focusing on quality but rather on quantity. Are they just hoping that at least 1 hero will succeed? Is that their brilliant plan? He wondered. The princess continued, as representatives of the kingdom of the rising sun, you must stand proudly and become even stronger to defeat the Demon King. The MC pursed his lips. He quietly tried to get her to stop, barely suppressing his laughter at the country's name. Then he turned to the queen. He asked if he could ask a question. Could they return to their world? The queen said she would explain briefly. There was no way to return. This frightened the 3 girls, and a confused Amanda asked why he would even want to go back. She said he should be thankful for the opportunity to become a respected hero of the kingdom. Everything was provided for him. Inori grew restless, wondering what she meant. There was no way back. They were supposed to just accept this and learn from the kingdom. The king then apologized for putting them to work so soon and asked them to touch a special plate. He said the plate would recognize the blessings bestowed upon them. The court magician placed the plate in front of them, and the MC stared at it. Ruto's blessing was limit break. Ovi's was barrier creation. And Tamaki's was magic affinity. When Inori touched the plate, it revealed his blessing was appraisal. Both the king and Inori himself were confused by this interesting blessing. His blessing didn't match the other 3's at all. It was as if he were a commoner, not a hero. Later, they were taken to have their physical and magical powers tested. Ruto showed supernatural results in physical abilities, while Ovi and Tamaki displayed inhuman mastery in magic. Inori's magic, however, was stuck at an ordinary level. This made him feel that his body had been much stronger before the summoning. He was completely outclassed by the girls. It was a bit disappointing, but it was to be expected. After all, they were the heroes, and there was a reason for that. Later, they decided to gather in Ruto's room to discuss their future plans. As soon as Inori walked in, he noticed her room was much bigger than his. Just then, Tamaki's voice broke his train of thought. She was asking him what he was doing there. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "You're not a hero. You don't have a single bit of power. Why were you even summoned?" Inori just smiled. She said it right to his face. Tamaki then added that she wasn't worried about him, just curious. He immediately thought, "She's totally worried about me. She's just trying to hide it." Ruto told her not to say things like that, adding that Inori's detective abilities were surprisingly sharp. At that moment, the MC realized that not all the heroes felt the same way about him. Ruto added that she agreed. She said he might not be able to fight, but personally, she'd feel safer with him under Ovi's protection. Inori understood. He thought about the energetic Tamaki and her opposite, the calm Ovi. A pretty face certainly says a lot. All three of them were beautiful. He mused that they were the lucky ones, the main characters who had their own lives to get back to. Tamaki asked if they thought it was worth staying in this country. Ruto thought for a moment, but just as she was about to speak, the MC blurted out, "Isn't this place amazing? We were welcomed so warmly." I mean, what could he possibly complain about? He then put a finger to his lips and showed them a note. It said that someone was listening to their conversation, so it would be better if they didn't say anything unnecessary. They all immediately tensed up and fell silent. Inori had instantly learned about the eavesdropper thanks to his appraisal ability. Understood. It was hard to believe, but his ability was incredibly powerful, allowing him to see people and animals through walls. It gave him the power to detect presences. Just then, he sensed someone outside his door again, even though the maid had already finished her work and left. She had already gone, so had she come back for some reason, or was it someone else? He looked at his notebook and wrote a new request asking AOI to create a soundproof barrier. She nodded in response. Then, standing in the middle of the room, she cast a barrier over them. After a moment, she announced her success, but admitted she wasn't used to it yet. Because of that, it wouldn't last long. Ruto smiled and thanked her, which made her a little embarrassed, prompting the MC to quietly tell them to go flirt somewhere else. Tamaki shot back, asking why they should listen to him. Ruto immediately got serious, saying he didn't know if they realized it or not, but their powers didn't fit within the normal bounds of this world. If they didn't want to cause chaos throughout the whole country, how else would they figure things out? That's why he was working in secret. Tamaki angrily asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. He pointed out that they were the ones who had been summoned. The MC said he thought this country was also going through a rough patch. He couldn't say for sure since they didn't know anything about this world yet, but the kingdom was probably in trouble. Their king seemed to be handling a lot of things himself. If all went well, he wouldn't have to deal with these hassles. Besides, he had very few vassals and almost no guards. Tamaki agreed with him. He'd thought the same thing, but at least they got good food. Or did they? That costs money after all. He replied that the food was actually very basic, just loaded with garlic and spices, which is why it tasted that way. He made a face thinking that he had actually liked it and found the food to be special. He added that this room didn't feel like a hero's quarters at all. It seemed more like a place a common soldier would live, and his own room was even smaller than this. He remembered his first summon and suspected that these three were probably being summoned somewhere new every day, which gave them something to compare this kingdom to. He said that since they still had no connection to this country, they should think about escaping. With their combined strength, they could easily overpower the entire army. Plus, it was a good chance to find their way back home. They remained silent considering his proposal. Tamaki then said that perhaps they were this country's last hope and they shouldn't let that hope die. Aoi added that just because they said there was no way out, who was to say they weren't hiding the truth? Inori agreed, saying to reveal everything right away. It would be foolish to give in, and Ruto voiced his agreement. They didn't have enough power or knowledge yet, so for now they just had to wait. Suddenly, Tamaki approached Inori and noticed her outfit was see-through, a fact he seemed to have completely forgotten. He immediately covered his eyes with his hands, thinking it was way too revealing. Seeing his reaction, Ruto told the girl that some things are better left ignored. It was a little late, of course, but everyone gets past it. So they should just leave him be. The MC thought he was being clever, associating his eye with 8th grade syndrome. It was better for him anyway. He decided to go along with them for the time being, saying they shouldn't underestimate the power of his vision. When he got back to his room, he wondered what kind of abilities he possessed. Theoretically, if he wanted to see his own stats, a window should just appear. Instantly, a system window opened in front of him. All of his stats were around 1,000 or even higher. He noticed the numbers were quite large, but without an average to compare them to, they were meaningless. He recalled sweating bullets during the physical exam, while the other three were chatting happily, and he wondered why his results were so bad. He decided to check his skills first. His right eye was the all-seeing magical eye, and his left was the creation eye. He also had skill stealing, dark magic, and appraisal. Because he was constantly being summoned, he had developed some pretty good skills. However, on his third summoning, he had become a demon vampire. That's why he suffered from the sun god's hate effect. Rejected by the sun god of the day reduces the power of nocturnal races to 1/10 of their normal strength. Therefore, during the daytime, his abilities were severely limited. This was the reason for his poor exam results. He had been out under the hot sun for a long time, which was why he had a headache and the garlic-heavy food tasted bland to him. Even his attraction to the two girls was explained. It was actually their blood that had been drawing him in. He had been so absorbed in using his appraisal ability that he had completely forgotten about his own subconscious urges. He figured that having heterochromia and being a vampire were tolerable. He could deal with it one way or another. But first he needed to learn more about himself and his abilities. He remembered all his summons to different worlds and thought he had a whole collection of abilities. He could even detect living beings within his range of vision. He picked up a candle stand and decided to use his magical creation powers to turn the scrap metal into a weapon. He removed the lit candle, leaving only the iron stand. Then he used his magic and transformed it into a dagger. Now he decided to find out what his right, all-seeing magical eye could do. It offered enhanced kinetic vision, clairvoyance, telescopic vision, microscopic vision, and night vision. Vision assessment, illusion, removal foresight, photographic memory, a third-person viewpoint, you name it. It seemed like it could handle almost any task imaginable. But since he still had a long way to go to understand it all, he had to decide which path to focus on. So for now, he decided to set that aside and check out the details of his magical eye. Turns out it can also be used to create any kind of magic circle. The circles can be transferred directly to his account and activated at any time. He didn't quite grasp what that meant, so he decided to practice some local magic instead. He figured he'd think about it later. Besides, he had plenty of other skills like pumping speed, increased dark magic, and weapon crafting. He was especially interested in the blood-sucking skill. If he drains nearly all of a victim's blood, they become a vampire. And if he puts his blood into a virgin girl, she'll become his loyal vampire servant. However, if her virginity is lost, she'll just turn into a regular vampire. Also, if he spills his blood on a vampire after it's died, it will be resurrected as his slave. On top of that, if he drains every last drop of blood from a being, all of its memories will be transferred to him. Taking all of this in, he let out a nervous smile and started to wonder just what kind of demon he'd become. If he completely drains a person's blood, he can steal all their powers. So despite his weakness during the daytime, it would be a huge mistake to consider the skill useless. But first things first, he needed to adjust to this new world and his new body. And with that, a new day dawned. They all gathered at the training grounds, where they were met by a woman. This was Ayana Eiji, the Knight Captain of the Rising Sun Kingdom, who would be teaching them the art of controlling their bodies. Inori was a little surprised that the Knight Captain was a woman. He figured, I know it's a fantasy world, but still. He guessed this was likely the result of some past economic crisis and a push to change public opinion. Ayana explained that she understood everyone was drawn to magic, but they couldn't afford to ignore the fundamentals of controlling their bodies. Normally, this would begin with basic strength training, but that didn't seem to be what she had planned for them. Inori frowned, thinking that was a fair point. He took a peek at the other three and checked their stats. Rudo's were about what you'd expect. Tamaki had the most mana, and while Aoi had just as much, she was physically very weak. Even so, Inori considered the abilities of all three to be completely inhuman. The Knight Captain told the three heroes that after learning the basics, they could choose the path that suited them best. In Inori's case, however, things were different. He wouldn't get to make a choice until he reached the level of an average warrior. With that, he got started on his practice. While he was doing push-ups, the Knight Captain stayed right beside him, constantly pushing him to keep going. It was absolute torture for our MC. He was already dead tired, and the hot sun was giving him a pounding headache. Ayana had said she'd keep a close eye on him and cheer him on, but at this point, his head was already spinning. Even if he wanted to run for it, he wouldn't have been able to. Suddenly, he heard the princess's voice. Inori knew immediately the tsundere from yesterday had arrived, but next to her was another girl he didn't recognize. He started wondering, who's this? Is she a maid? Or maybe another princess? Or is she just really beautiful? Her expression bothered him a little, though. It was an artificial doll-like smile. The Knight Captain addressed them both as princesses and asked what brought them here. The second princess replied with a smile. She said she'd just come to watch her heroes train, and Amanda, the first princess, added that she just happened to have some free time. She haughtily remarked that they should be grateful. The MC just laughed. The other princess then approached him smiling and said it was a pleasure to finally meet him. Her name was Arya, and she would be spending the rest of the day with him. After training, they went to a room in the palace, where Arya informed him that lectures would be held in the afternoon. He looked at her and thought, oh boy, this is going to be rough. He was put in a separate class while the other three were grouped together to be taught by the eldest princess, Amanda. The reason was simple. Amanda declared she would not teach a non-hero. She claimed it was inappropriate. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He swore to himself that one day she'd get what was coming to her. Arya decided it was time to start the lesson. She picked up a book, but before she could begin, Inori raised his hand. She asked if he had a question. He asked, "Aren't you the first princess's younger sister?" She explained that surprisingly, this wasn't true. She was actually 1 year older than her sister, but due to the laws of succession, Amanda was the heir to the throne. It all seemed very complicated to him. Clearly, age wasn't the deciding factor here. He decided not to ask any more about it and focused back on the lecture. According to the lesson, the Kingdom of the Rising Sun was founded by Sosiceres, a member of the hero party that defeated the previous Demon King. In other words, their nation's founder was a sorceress. Because of this, people's faith in sorcery grew, and women generally held more power in society. For many years, the throne was passed down through a line of queens. The current ruling queen's husband is merely the regent. That's the general structure of their government. The queen can even remove the king from power with a simple divorce. After explaining the politics, the second princess continued her lecture on the history of her kingdom and the basic principles of this world's magic. Evening came all too soon. He returned to his room and while flipping through a book, thought about tomorrow, when he'd finally get to apply these principles to the local magic. And starting the day before yesterday, the practical portion of his magic lessons began. He had borrowed a book on the basic principles of magic from one of the other princesses. Of course, after dozing off during her lessons, it was a bit cheeky of him to ask her for a book. But she'd lent it to him with an amused smile that never quite left her face, even though there was no way she was thrilled about it. He now had a diagram of a magic circle. He was going to try and succeed where he had failed yesterday. He used his Eye of Magical Diagram creation, which should have allowed him to visualize, save, and activate any magic circle he saw. But for some reason, nothing was working. He couldn't feel any flow of power within the circle. He tried visualizing other magic circles he'd seen, but still nothing happened. Feeling completely defeated, he closed the book. Suddenly, he remembered he had another magical eye. There was a pen and paper on his nightstand. He drew a magic circle he remembered vividly, one from the same world his eyes were from. It was from his doctor's most advanced hypnosis treatment. Of course, a normal person wouldn't be able to recall such a complex diagram in an instant, but his right eye with its photographic memory made it possible. Looking at the finished drawing, he decided to try using his left eye. He reasoned that since the eye and the circle were from the same world, they should be compatible. He immediately felt a completely new sensation and thought he might have actually succeeded. He decided to test it out and called for his maid Nala. When she came in, he told her he needed a little help. He then activated the hypnosis circle he'd drawn. Nala looked shocked for a moment, and then her eyes began to glaze over. He waved a hand in front of her face, wondering if it had worked. To test it, he decided to ask a few questions. His first question was, what color were her undergarments? Nala answered, and he used his other eye, the clairvoyant one, to confirm that she was telling the truth. His first attempt at hypnosis was a success. He wondered if this meant his eyes couldn't store magic circles from this new world, and that he was only capable of using hypnosis for now. But he thought that couldn't be right. He had been summoned multiple times, and each time, a summoning magic circle had appeared beneath his feet. So he should have been able to remember it. If he'd stored that memory and transferred it to his eye, he could have teleported himself. Just then, a magic circle appeared beneath his feet and a corresponding circle materialized somewhere in the forest. And just like that, he teleported to a forest on the outskirts of the capital. It was a combination technique, using the clairvoyance of his right eye to set a destination and the teleportation of his left eye to travel. Now he could leave the palace whenever he wanted. Since it was nighttime, his powers were working at full capacity. So he decided to run a few tests. He found a nearby structure and cast dark magic on it. Under his control, nearby objects immediately started floating in the air. Any lifeless matter is susceptible to dark magic and can be moved about freely. Plus, he can hide objects under his control within his own shadow. Controlled objects can't affect uncontrolled ones. However, if he solidifies them, they seem to interact with the world normally. It's both convenient and a bit inconvenient. He also has another dark magic skill that allows him to merge with shadows. He could move through them freely. He submerged himself, then peeked out from the shadow of a tree, thinking how incredibly convenient it was. The space within the shadows was surprisingly vast. Next, it was time to master his weapon crafting skill. He crafted a sword from stone and began to practice with intense concentration. During his training, he used his all-seeing eye to recall the drills he had seen the heroes perform. He returned to the same spot night after night, repeating the practice as many times as he could. After just a few swings of the sword, he was already breathless. Despite that, he felt a sense of accomplishment, and when he looked up, a system notification was floating in front of him. The notification showed that he had learned the source technique skill at level 1. Now he understood where that sense of accomplishment had come from. Time passed, and though it wasn't instant, his training paid off. Now it was time to level up. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he heard a noise behind him. Peeking through the bushes, he saw a massive bird snatching a rabbit in a clearing. At first he thought it might be a demon, so he used his identify ability on it. The system window showed it was a bird-like demon called a ketu. He started to wonder if everything in this forest was some kind of monster. It couldn't be that powerful, though, because he already knew this bird was a common creature here. In fact, the bed in his room was stuffed with its feathers. So the people of this kingdom regularly hunt these giant birds. He began to wonder what he should do next. Maybe he should start with some weaker demons. He tried to assess the other creatures in the forest. But aside from intelligence, all their other stats were around 500 or 600. Some were even higher. Either the demons in this forest were incredibly powerful, or he was just that weak. They were much more powerful than he'd expected. Of course, he probably still stood a chance in a one-on-one fight. But if they surrounded him, it would be all over. He couldn't face them without getting stronger first. Meanwhile, the second princess was wandering the palace corridors. The captain of the knights blocked her path. He insisted she shouldn't be out so late at night without any guards. The Princess Arya simply smiled and asked if they could speak for a moment. Model. He confirmed that Inori and the other heroes were forbidden from using magical devices during their training. The 3 heroes were practicing with training weapons while Inori was focused on strength exercises. Until they mastered the basics of controlling their own bodies, it was unacceptable to give them any training more advanced than this. Arya cut him off before he could finish asking what the problem was. Why couldn't he just explain why they weren't allowed to touch the magical devices yet? Ayana looked at him, thoughtfully asked him to wait a moment, and then admitted that he was right. Sure, they would have become more powerful if they'd mastered the devices, but if they had become dependent on that kind of power from the start, all their discipline would have been ruined. He personally believed it was more important to remove all temptations from their sight and to train their bodies and souls first. Arya didn't seem to like his words, but she quickly put on a smile. She said he was right, and that there was no need to worry when the most powerful person was working with them. Ayana looked at him sadly and commented that it had been a long time since she'd seen his old smile. The princess remained silent. She then turned to him, insisting there was no change in her smile. Ayana then carefully asked what he thought about their future queen. Ayana showed him a portrait of Amanda. He looked at it and said that, of course, she was talented with her own principles and firm beliefs. The people loved her, and she was worthy of the throne. Ayana asked, "Do you genuinely think so?" The princess replied, "What are you trying to say? No one knows how far someone can fall from grace. One day the kingdom will consider your words an insult." Ayana replied that she understood. After the princess left, Ayana thought to herself that the princess shouldn't worry about it. 2 weeks have passed since I was summoned to this world, and all 3 heroes were training hard. Rado had a natural affinity for the sword. He was now receiving focused swordsmanship training. Tamaki had selected a staff. Theoretically, it should have helped him focus while chanting spells. In his case, however, the staff was nothing more than an ordinary club. It seemed like he was all brawn and no brain. Aoi was learning archery. An archer is typically quite vulnerable. But that wasn't a problem for her thanks to her protective armor. She was an expert in ranged attacks and destructive power at close quarters. They could provide assistance, firepower, and protection at a moment's notice. They were now a well-balanced squad. 3 days ago, the MC had also started his own serious training. Instead of swordsmanship, he focused on daggers, throwing weapons, stealth attacks, and occasionally disabling traps. It was clear they wanted him to become a spy. And it made sense. The role was a perfect fit for his spying abilities. But what about his other skills? He didn't need anyone's help to develop those. Every night he would practice in the forest. Using dark magic, he controlled the daggers in the air. Waiting for the right moment, he broke the magical connection to one, sending it flying into a tree trunk. Seeing this, he felt that applying today's lessons was nearly impossible, and the thought frustrated him. This hatred he felt towards the sun god was deeply disturbing. He wondered if he'd be able to understand it after getting the adjudicate skill. After finishing his dagger practice, it was time to sharpen his other skills. Hiding in the darkness, he targeted a bird demon. He stalked it, and once it was distracted with its meal, he emerged from his hiding spot using the shadows on the ground to sneak close to the demon. The bird demon spotted him too late. He quickly put his plan into action. Using a thread of dark magic from his weapon-making ability, he ensnared the demon, causing it to tense up immediately. The bird screamed and tried to escape. He then used hypnosis, looking directly into its eyes. The demon's eyes began to glow yellow. Confident in his victory, he carefully extended his hand and waited a few seconds. The demon didn't even flinch. After that, he struck it with his dagger, finishing it off. Living beings remain unaffected by his dark magic storage. The dead, however, can be easily moved into the shadows and hidden. After tossing the bird's body into his shadow storage, he descended into it himself. Based on his observations, he concluded there was no need to worry about any other demons in the area. He sank his fangs into the bird's neck, hoping that by draining its blood, his vampire power would help him level up, or at least enhance his skills. After that, he went out hunting again. This time, he found some kind of reptile. He thought the creature didn't look very appetizing, but he had no choice. As long as it was beneficial, he would continue the hunt. As soon as dawn broke, he teleported back to his room and fell asleep. This became his nightly routine. The maid woke him up and he thought to himself that he couldn't keep her under hypnosis forever. He'd only do it if he urgently needed to go somewhere. Over the past 2 weeks, he had successfully gathered all sorts of interesting information about the kingdom from her. It was all made possible thanks to his miraculous hypnosis. The current queen had no children. In this country, the line of succession is matrilineal. A queen must give birth to a daughter who will eventually become her successor, ensuring the kingdom continues. However, for some unknown reason, many members of the royal family had died of illness, which could have had tragic consequences for the kingdom. To avoid being left without a successor, a distant relative of the Queen Isle's daughter became the king's concubine. Soon after a daughter was born, she was named Arya. Her name meant heiress, and she was a hard-working student beloved by the public. Until she was 7 years old, everyone was pleased with this success. In that same year, the king and queen finally had a daughter of their own, and they named her Amanda, which means Bilwad. The queen adored her daughter, who also inherited her talent for magic. Now Arya found herself in a position where she had to compete for the throne. She no longer felt the need to study with such dedication. When Amanda turned 7, she was named the first princess, and the official successor, pushing Arya to the sidelines. The meaning of her name was all but forgotten, and people lost interest in her. The princess was left all alone. Ignored by the queen, she spent her days wandering the palace like a living doll. Now he glanced over at her during the lecture and thought that she was just like him, not expecting anything from anyone. Seeing her slumped over the desk, he thought that she needed to wake up and acknowledge her own talent. If he kept sleeping like this, he'd end up empty-handed and empty-minded. He let out a yawn, thinking it had been a long time since he'd heard a lecture that was even remotely interesting. He then mused that it was a pity he had no talent for magic. Instead, he had been taught intelligence techniques and spycraft. He didn't think he was talented in that field either. He reflected on how he couldn't use any of this world's genuine magical powers at all. In this world, even commoners could use basic magic. The fact that he couldn't use the kind of magic everyone else could see was strange. Just then, Arya spoke to him. "You're the head of the knights, and you're always incredibly busy. And yet you still make time for me. Is it because you saw something special in me?" He stretched and replied with a bored sigh, "It's because we're heroes." Arya then said seriously, "If you want to become powerful, you need to put in more effort." Her sudden intensity made him a little uncomfortable. Then she told him to follow her. She led him to a tower. They descended a flight of stairs and found themselves before a huge set of doors, which Arya opened with magic. "The class was crowded today," she said. "We can use that to our advantage." He was a hero, but people called him weak. "Do you like them saying that?" she asked, turning to face him. He looked at her in surprise as she added, "I don't think that way about you." Her past had left an indelible mark on her. She suppressed all her emotions, leading the kingdom's residents to call her the doll. But looking at her now, he wouldn't have called her that. When she finished her spell, a massive training room opened up before them. Arya walked to the center of the room and stood before him. She stated that if he didn't work on his skills, he would be expelled from the palace. "There's no obligation to support those who don't try," she said. He thought to himself that she was playing her trump card right away. "And I suppose using spycraft doesn't count as working," he retorted. Arya replied that she didn't consider his current attitude appropriate either. "But you're still not making the necessary effort. Is it really that difficult to apply yourself a little? Not everyone receives such blessings." She continued. He remembered how he used to fall asleep during his daytime lessons because he practiced all night. "But I am trying my best," he replied, nervously clenching his fist. He was a far cry from the other 3 heroes and had no talent for studying. Everyone has their own limitations. She said, "This special training room has a strong magical protective shield. No screams, no noise. No one will hear a thing, so you don't need to worry." She then snuck up behind him. With an angry glare, she kicked him hard in the back, slamming him against the door. Astonished, he turned toward her as she said, "You haven't even smelled gunpowder yet. If you get expelled because of your laziness, your life will be over the second you meet your first demon, even a weak one. You should live up to the gifts you've been given, not just surrender." He looked at her thinking that she was no doll, but a genuine noble. "You have a chance to change," she insisted. "You shouldn't give up." A faint smile crossed his face. Then he laughed out loud and said, "You're a good kid." Her face immediately turned red at his words, and she retorted that he was underestimating her. "I just didn't expect you to be that strong," he admitted. He suggested, "Let's not hurt each other's feelings." But she told him not to worry. "Besides," he added, "like you, I'm someone who values my life." She looked at him with surprise, then paused for a moment. "Perhaps I've underestimated you too," she admitted. For some reason, he looked incredibly strong. He thought to himself that his expulsion was a sure thing, but he was still thinking about what to do next. His information-gathering mission was not yet complete. That's why he had no plans on leaving just yet. When it was time for the next training session, he decided he would have to demonstrate his skills somehow. But the problem was that the field training was set to take place in real dungeons, and a plan for that hadn't been made yet. The training session ended, and he let out a deep breath. Perhaps he should ask the head of the knights to convince the queen. Just then, Ayana invited him to her place for a chat. He went to her office and made his request, but she told him it would be difficult. She asked if he understood that his abilities weren't quite up to the task yet. He accepted this, saying it just gave him more motivation for his daily training. But before he could finish, Ayana cut him off, insisting that wasn't the issue. She assured him she wasn't underestimating him at all. Instead, she asked if he would like to join the Night Riders squad. He was completely taken aback by her proposal. Ayana explained that on the battlefield, his abilities would be indispensable. They would help him fulfill his role as a knight. Whether it was dungeon exploration or the war with the Demon King, he would only get stronger each time. The problem wasn't that she didn't want to help, but that she had no influence over his circumstances. However, if he were to stop being a hero and become a soldier, he could start to decide his own fate. This would be his ticket to escaping exile. He understood that accepting her offer meant taking on a great deal of responsibility, and it wasn't something she could just manage for him. He told her he appreciated the offer but needed some time to think it over. She agreed, and told him that if he ever had nowhere else to turn, he should come to her. After their conversation, Inori went to the window, lost in thought about his impending exile. A few days passed. Inori was dozing off in a lecture when a student asked if the heroes from the neighboring country were coming for a visit. Someone wondered why they were even coming. The princess explained there would be a meeting the next day, so all classes and training were canceled. Inori was surprised by the news. The princess then added with a smile that he wouldn't be attending either. He couldn't help but wonder why. Then it hit him. Of course, he was the extra person. The guests from the neighboring country were welcomed with a grand celebration. Watching from a distant window, Inori thought about the kingdom's economic crisis. Was this really the right time for such a lavish party? Besides, who on earth would want to explain to the guests why a fourth hero had suddenly appeared alongside the prophesied 3? That would definitely lead to an investigation, and he wanted no more trouble. Taking a deep breath, he got out of bed thinking that it didn't feel good to sit on the sidelines while everyone else was having fun. Using his magical eye, he watched the festivities unfolding in the palace's main hall. He noticed the princess in a surprisingly casual yet bold outfit, and saw her favorite lecturer was also dressed up. He immediately spotted the frozen smile on the lecturer's face. His gaze then fell on the tables laden with delicious food, which only made him feel worse. Thanks to his hypnosis skill, he knew this formal greeting was a key reason for the kingdom's economic troubles. The queen was far too eager to show off her kingdom's glory in front of other nations, and on this matter, she was completely unwilling to listen to the king's concerns. His eyes then fell on Rudo and the girls who were talking with some strangers. Could those be the guests? One of the 3 boys looked different from the others. His hair was long enough to cover his eyes, giving him a gloomy look. They all seemed to get along well, though. And that blonde kid, isn't he Japanese? To find out for sure, he used his identification skill and saw the name Masayoshi Date, which translates to justice. Seemed like a bit of a pretentious name for a kid like that, he thought. He then saw the boy shouting at Rudo and wondered what his problem was. He was too far away to hear anything, so he decided to try reading their lips. An enraged Masayoshi was demanding that Ruto bring Inori to him at once, and then he challenged him to a duel. After the welcome ceremony ended, Inori was summoned to meet the heroes. The moment Masayoshi saw him, he challenged him to a duel. Everyone was shocked, and Masayoshi's own companions looked a little embarrassed. When our MC asked for a reason, Masayoshi declared he wanted to prove his worth to the goddess. Inori asked, "Which goddess are you talking about?" Masayoshi told him not to play dumb, the goddess from that white space where they were all summoned. Inori asked what a duel had to do with any of that. Masayoshi proudly announced that he had proposed marriage to the goddess. He then got right in Inori's face. He screamed that the goddess said she would consider his proposal if he could defeat Inori in a duel. Inori took a deep breath. Okay, now he was starting to understand what was going on. Simply put, the goddess had pawned her problems off on him. He swore to himself he would get revenge the next time they met. Just then, a confused Ruto asked what this white place was. Masayoshi's companions also seemed to have no idea what he was talking about, which our MC found odd. Had they all been summoned differently? Deciding to cut to the chase, Inori told Masayoshi that while he didn't fully understand the situation, he accepted the challenge. Masayoshi was ecstatic. "Now we're talking," he exclaimed. Inori then asked if he had decided on the type of duel. From the look on the guy's face, it was obvious he hadn't thought that far ahead at all. Inori explained that his blessing was completely unsuitable for a standard fight, and unlike the other heroes, his body was that of a normal human. Simple one-on-one duels wouldn't do for them. Of course, that's not the case if he's the type of hero who enjoys bullying the helpless. If he takes pleasure in it, then that's a whole different story. Masayoshi shouted that he couldn't have found a better condition, and eagerly agreed. All the other heroes were astonished to see him agree so quickly, especially since the terms were entirely in the MC's favor. The MC proposed they use a dungeon near the capital, where the knights train. The winner would be the one who defeats the boss of the first floor. Masayoshi smiled with confidence. He gave his agreement. Ruri whispered to the MC, asking if he was really confident in this. She reminded him that this wasn't just about his spying ability. She wondered how he planned on defeating the boss with his current abilities. He just replied that everything would be fine. He had a plan. The next day he went to the duel, ready for a fight. However, after he suffered a crushing defeat, the queen summoned him. She immediately started to scold him. He had offered to change the location of the duel, but he still lost miserably. The queen had been right. This man was incredibly powerful. His swordsmanship was so masterful it allowed him to cut down anything that got in his way. It was on par with the skill of the captain of the knights. Not even the floor boss stood a chance against him. Masayoshi defeated it instantly. Meanwhile, the MC used his spying ability to bypass all the monster's traps and even the boss itself. So from an outsider's perspective, it certainly looked like a crushing defeat. The queen was furious. Up until now, she had ignored his laziness and failures because her husband and the knight's mentor, whom she trusted completely, had vouched for his immense talent. But now that he had harmed the country's prestige, she could no longer tolerate his behavior. For a few moments, silence filled the throne hall, and then the queen declared loudly, she declared that he was to be exiled from the kingdom. But the MC only smiled and replied while everyone else nearby remained emotionless. This was what they had expected. The queen asked if he had any objections, and he replied that he did, considering that he was the one who won. Damage to the country's prestige. What damage was that he reminded her that it was a simple duel that he had agreed to. The only thing at stake was honor. She couldn't understand what he was talking about, so he explained that he was referring to the honor of being the hero's opponent. He was just talking. It had been decided that the duel would be kept a secret from everyone, except for the two of them. To begin with, he wasn't even an official hero. He was a person who had never even been publicly introduced to the citizens, so it was clear that he wasn't in a position to insult the kingdom or the queen. This duel was basically just an ordinary practice match. However, that didn't mean he was going to sit by and do nothing. After he finished speaking, guards entered the throne chamber. They brought 2 large chests filled with gold coins and gems. They placed the chests at his feet, and he mentioned that he had brought back a modest prize from the dungeon. Seeing such a massive amount of gold, the queen and her daughter were left stunned. Inori mentioned that it was the treasure from the first floor. He may not be able to commit to being their hero, but he couldn't return empty-handed either. "Please accept this from my loot," he offered, as the queen began to examine the gold. The MC smiled, mentioning that with his abilities, it was actually quite easy. He did it all so they could see his true value. The princess was astonished. She had expected him to be exiled, and so the troublesome guest, satisfied with his victory, returned home. With no obstacles left, the threat of exile against Inori was gone, and he could finally start hunting with his full dedication. That very night, he set out for the forest. Consuming a shadow, he emerged from the darkness. He emerged and began to think that he'd had more than his fill of dealing with bird-type monsters lately. Something felt strange. He looked around and thought, is something wrong? Was this forest planning to surprise him with something else? There were only trees around, so nothing was immediately visible. But his sensing ability was still going off. He touched his chin, contemplating. He felt that it wasn't his sensing ability, but something else that was helping him. Using his all-seeing magical eye, he dispelled all illusions and saw a magical dome in front of him. Now he understood the reason for that strange feeling. His sensing ability was being completely blocked. That was because he had acquired it in this world, and the all-seeing magical eye had no such protection against it. He wondered what was inside. Perhaps there were monsters even more powerful than the birds. Yep, he immediately decided to go check it out. After all, he could always escape if things went south. At that very moment, a nearby pack of wolves sensed his intrusion. When he stepped inside the dome, he immediately heard the rustling of leaves. Several brown wolves emerged from the bushes and lunged at him, but he instantly wrapped himself in his shadow to get away. He got excited thinking that he had never faced an entire pack before. He created dark threads from his shadow, which immediately dealt with the wolves. When the task was complete, he touched his chin and looked at the ground thoughtfully. He thought to himself that even a single wolf possessed considerable strength, and here was a full pack. Yet he still defeated all of them. Concealing the corpses with his shadows, he began to descend, thinking that if things kept going this smoothly, he wouldn't need to bother buying that bird after all. He knew he had to press on, but first he made sure to check on the bird he was carrying as a precaution. After that, he ventured further until he arrived at a lake with an island in its center, upon which stood a massive tree. He hesitated to go any closer, sensing that a boss monster was probably just ahead. Deciding to feign ignorance, he took a single step forward. Immediately, a huge wolf leaped out from the forest and attacked him. The man quickly retreated. He was astonished to see that his arm was almost gone. He had anticipated a demon attack, but not one like this. Immediately, the wolf attacked again. He tried to parry with his cloak, but the blow sent him flying into a nearby tree trunk. When he came to, he saw the enemy watching him and grew angry, wondering what was going on. His identification skill revealed that the magical wolf-like creature before him was a Fenrir. So, it's not a demon, he thought. He glanced at his arm and mused, it's just a minor injury. Now what's my next move? He considered hiding in the darkness, but he knew the wolf would just be waiting for him at the exit. At that very moment, Fenrir lunged. As it closed in on Inori, he began to panic, but quickly forced himself to think. The moment the wolf struck, he vanished from his spot. It turned out he had managed to take flight just moments before the attack, revealing his true nature as a demon of the third realm. For some reason, he was a vampire, and now he decided it was time to put all his abilities to the test. Fenrir stopped to observe him, questioning why he had come. Inori was shocked, thinking to himself, it can talk. Of course it could. It was a magical being. The creature informed him that he had strayed from the path. Inori replied that he understood one couldn't simply cross an illusion of this scale casually. That was precisely why he was so curious to discover what was inside. After all, illusions of this magnitude aren't created without a reason. Fenrir stated that the implication was clear. Inori was an intruder, just like those who had killed its kind. Therefore, it had no intention of letting him leave alive. The MC watched it carefully and asked if this place was significant to it. Fenrir replied that it would be happy to explain everything right before sending him to the afterlife to think it over. The wolf informed him that its pack had made a binding agreement with a witch to protect this land. They eliminate any demon they recognize as a threat, a category that includes curious intruders like him. If he didn't resist, his death would be painless. Otherwise, what happened to his arm would happen to his entire body. But upon glancing at the arm, the wolf immediately fell silent. It was confused. While it had been talking, Inori had unknowingly healed all of his wounds. He immediately realized it was thanks to his vampire powers, though he hadn't expected his regeneration to be quite so powerful. Fenrir gritted its teeth and said in an exasperated tone that he was clearly no ordinary person. It then lunged at him, screaming that he wouldn't be leaving this place alive. The MC hadn't anticipated such a swift attack. He leaped to the side just as the powerful wolf's jaws were about to snap shut. It was all thanks to his special right eye, which allowed him to see the attack coming. Still pushing forward like this was proving difficult. He flew higher, contemplating his next move. Even though he could fly, reaching the top of the cliff would be a challenge. For now, he'd have to remain in the air and try to descend at the edge of the forest. As he swiftly descended, he noticed Fenrir observing him from the peak of a cliff. Just then, Inori saw something shiny speeding toward him. He immediately threw his hands up to protect his face as the sharp projectiles shattered all the nearby trees. It turned out Fenrir had launched its own fur at him. The wolf had thrown clumps of fur that were as sharp as blades. The MC screamed in pain as many of the clumps were now embedded in his body. Without giving him a moment to breathe, Fenrir appeared right in front of him. Another powerful strike, Inori thought while dodging. Even hypnosis isn't working on it, he realized. It's far too aggressive. What should I do? Oh, seeing a waterfall up ahead, he realized he'd reached a dead end and panic began to set in. Meanwhile, the wolf had caught up landing on the cliff above him. It swung its tail, launching another volley of sharp fur clumps his way. The projectiles tore massive holes in his wings, earning a grin from the wolf. It then opened its jaws for the finishing blow. Just as it was about to strike, the MC summoned massive pillars of darkness from the shadows. Fenrir was stunned by the sight and was barely able to dodge the pillars in time. Inori considered himself fortunate that he had already made these preparations, although victory was still a long way off. His wounds started to heal again as the wolf bared its teeth. The MC figured he could use the magic circle to teleport, but to use the hypnotic and effect-altering abilities of his left eye, he first had to observe and modify the teleportation circle. This meant he needed to buy himself some time. He pulled out daggers stored in darkness and figured he just needed to keep stabbing it. Waving his daggers, he slowly advanced on Fenris, already thinking about his next move. The daggers bounced right off its fur. Inori panicked. When the wolf lunged, he dodged to the side, pulled out more daggers, and started running. Once again, the daggers just bounced off its body. He declared that this wouldn't be the end of him. Then the wolf swung its tail, shooting out sharp thorn-like needles. The MC immediately put his hands up, but a needle still pierced his stomach. He realized there was no point in trying to block everything. His heart was pounding and his legs were screaming in protest. The angry wolf seemed to call him stubborn. In response, Inori waved his hands, casting a web of dark threads over the entire area. The area shook with the sound of trees cracking under the tension of the threads, rendering the wolf immobile. It growled loudly, and the MC was pleased that he had successfully restrained it. But just then another cracking sound echoed. The threads shattered the trees they were anchored to, breaking apart and freeing Fenrir. The wolf growled as if to say it was all futile. Inori's heart sank, wondering how it had shattered the dark threads. Now he only had one option left. He created more threads and started binding them around all the surrounding trees, ensuring the wolf couldn't chase him. Hoping that would be enough, he scrambled up a tall tree. Fenrir screamed that trying to escape via the sky was foolish because he had just made himself an easy target. Meanwhile, Inori activated his left eye. The threads glowed yellow, scattering magic, and when a magic circle appeared beneath the wolf, he smiled, announcing that the circle's reconstruction was complete. He used the magic of his left eye, and as a magical circle appeared behind him, he launched himself into the air. And then he vanished. The surprised wolf looked up and screamed, "Did you decide to fly?" The MC reappeared right above its head and replied that his original plan was just to contain it, but now he changed his mind. As he said this, he stabbed daggers into its eyes, blinding it. Fenrir groaned and screamed from the burning pain. Smiling, Inori mentioned that he doesn't like to lose. The enraged wolf began devastating everything nearby, wondering how it would get its revenge. The MC, dodging its lashing tail, thought, "Didn't this thing show up untrained?" He climbed a nearby tree to observe it, but he was confused when the wolf seemed to look right at him. "Can it actually see me?" The wolf, as if reading his mind, confirmed that he was wrong. It could smell him. He smiled nervously, feeling its intense killing intent. And then the wolf's mouth appeared right in front of his face. He immediately leaped from the tree branch, thinking this was the moment. He teleported just before Fenrir could capture him. The wolf screamed that he could escape this time, but it would kill him next time for sure. Suddenly, Inori found himself back in his room. He took a deep breath, thinking that Fenrir had executed its attack perfectly, but still hadn't managed to kill him. He swore he would get his revenge. From that day on, he put all his effort into upgrading his equipment. He successfully infiltrated the 5th Arsenal and acquired certain metals and other materials. He also managed to get a sample of Fenrir's hide. He had acquired it as a precaution, though it had been extremely challenging. He placed the piece of hide on the table to examine it. Objects under the influence of magic tend to develop extraordinary properties. Crystallization, hardening, sharpening. He injected magic into a clump of the hide and it transformed into needles. Now he finally understood why he hadn't been able to pierce it. Its entire body was covered in this hide. He decided to construct a weapon from it, and dark threads appeared before him. But this time they had a different effect. If an opponent's magic wasn't strong enough to shatter the threads, they could be imbued with Gleipnir magic. On contact, they would transform into crystals. He carefully observed the new weapon. According to legend, Fenrir was bound by Gleipnir. A thought came to his mind: could he actually get his revenge with this? He crafted gloves from this thread, designing them to act as conduits for his magic and activate special properties on contact. He experimented a bit with abilities like hardening of darkness, hardening crystallization, and contraction. During the crystallization process, some parts would glow, forming a gorgeous-looking magic circle. This gave him the idea to make more items from the threads, and in this way, he constructed a full suit of Gleipnir. Now, he was ready for revenge. Soon after, he headed toward the forest. Hearing the sound of teleportation, he turned to see Fenrir appear. The MC greeted him, remarking that it had been a while since they'd last met. He then taunted Fenrir, asking if he hadn't gotten his fill last time. He added that he never expected Fenrir would dare to show his face here again. The MC lunged at him with a smile, observing how gorgeous his eyes had become. Fenrir replied to the joke with a punch. Fenrir yelled at him to shut up. The MC dodged, surprised that despite being blind, Fenrir's strike was aimed perfectly. Fenrir noted that this was the second time the MC had invaded his territory. But this time, he wouldn't let him leave alive. The MC mused that Fenrir's rage seemed to be affecting him more than his blindness. Fenrir was energized and adamant. His conviction was so strong that it made the MC absolutely determined to kill him. Inori rushed to attack the wolf. He summoned a pack of shadow wolves, and when they sank their teeth into Fenrir's skin, he froze in place. It happened so fast that Fenrir was unable to comprehend what was going on. The MC smiled and asked, "Do you get it now? Even without your eyes, you can see how much your own kind respects me." Fenrir became furious and demanded, "What did you do to them?" Inori replied, "I did them a great service. They're my loyal subjects now." Fenrir suddenly kicked out, sending the wolves flying. Inori hadn't anticipated the move and had to jump aside, taking some minor damage. This time, the damage was minimal. The suit didn't block the strike completely, but it did its job. Fenrir then launched a furious assault on him. He blocked the attack just as another pack of wolves emerged from the dense forest. Fenrir attacked Inori while he was momentarily distracted. Fenrir shouted that this was revenge for his brothers. Seeing his chance, Inori immediately used teleportation to get away. But Fenrir's attack only sliced through a log. He cried out in despair that his target had escaped once again. Sensing magical vibrations from above, Fenrir gathered all his strength and leaped high into the air. The MC called out that he hadn't run away at all. Fenrir was mistaken. Fenrir knew something was wrong. Just then, a web of threads fell upon him, slamming him back down to the ground. Inori had spread the threads around with the help of the shadow wolves. They had moved so stealthily that Fenrir hadn't sensed a thing. He couldn't even sense his own kind, and that terrified him. He demanded, "What is this?" Inori told him it was a thread made from his very own fur. The wolf was trapped. The MC waved his hand. He commanded Gleipnir to shrink, and the threads began to tighten, wrapping themselves securely around the wolf's body. In the end, he couldn't withstand the power of Gleipnir and collapsed. He growled, trying to free himself, but it was no use. He wasn't getting anywhere. The MC approached and taunted, "How does it feel being trapped by something made from your own body? Must be tough." He deliberately provoked Fenrir, making him angrier. The wolf kept struggling, getting battered by the tightening threads, all in a desperate ploy to distract the MC and teleport out at the last second. But the plan failed. Wishing him well, the MC left him entangled in his own trap and tightened the threads even more. Then the shadow wolves emerged to bid farewell to their former alpha. Fenrir lamented that he had worked so hard his whole life only for it to end like this. But his reign was over. Inori absorbed all of Fenrir's blood, increasing his level by 5, and acquiring several new skills from the fight. Among his new skills was a unique one, Mark of the King. The skill's description suddenly appeared before him. Then he heard a voice. To his surprise, it was one of the shadow wolves, and he realized they could now speak. The wolf apologized for addressing him so suddenly. He figured it must be because of his new Mark of the King skill. They were now completely under his command. He wondered what they wanted. The wolf asked if he, like their former master, had the power to create more of their kind. The wolf explained that their former master, Fenrir, had defended this land with his life. He fought to protect them. They wanted him to continue that legacy and protect the land alongside them. He promised he would do his best and thanked them for their loyalty. After they left, he took a deep breath. He suspected there would be consequences for all this, and he suddenly felt overwhelmed with exhaustion. He later returned home and joined the other heroes for dinner. During the meal, the conversation turned to the kingdom's princesses. Yudo mentioned that he'd been thinking about it and had a feeling the princesses didn't get along with each other very well. Tamaki added that one of the princesses in particular was very antisocial. Ovi agreed with a strange smile which made the others wonder what she knew. Rado clarified that it wasn't just that they were at odds. The second princess openly hated the first one. All the while the MC just quietly scraped at his food with a fork. His attention was on the pile of garlic on his plate when suddenly Rado announced it was time for Inori to go. He immediately stopped eating, looking up angrily to ask what garlic had to do with anything. Inori pointed out there were two girls right in front of him he could have asked instead, but Rado countered that they didn't know nearly as much as he did. Rado explained that he was taking lessons from her, so Inori should be the one to go ask the first princess. Inori argued that the arrogant princess would never speak to him, but Rado told him not to worry, assuring him that he would convince her to listen. Inori doubtfully asked how he'd manage that, and Rado replied with a smile that it would be easy because the first princess was crazy about Shinja. The girls didn't seem to care about what he was saying, and watching Rado, our MC, felt his own importance dwindling. Rado insisted this was all happening for a reason, and then brought up a 7-day leave, suggesting Inori could discuss it with the princess personally. Inori immediately agreed and soon found himself at the princess's door. As he knocked, he wondered why he had given in so easily. The princess called for him to enter, quickly explaining that Rado had already told her all about him. He entered the room with the thought that once this door closed, there would be no turning back. Amanda stated she was only giving him one chance to talk, so he should be grateful. Meanwhile, he looked around, noticing how luxurious the room was. However, the style was a chaotic mess. Noticing his expression, she smiled and asked if he was already overwhelmed. Of course he was. The room was filled with things he had never even dreamed of seeing. She pointed to a very beautiful vase and asked if he liked it. He confirmed that he did, and she proudly explained that it was a gift, just like everything else from people around the world. The royal family never needed to buy a thing. Realizing he needed to get out of there as soon as possible, he decided to get straight to the point and asked if she was worried about her current relationship with the other princess. She looked away slightly embarrassed and claimed she wasn't worried about it at all. He wondered what she wanted to talk about, then realizing in that moment that this issue wouldn't be so easy to resolve. Amanda acknowledged that Rado had told her he came to mediate, but she insisted that reconciliation was not what she wanted. He asked irritably if she really didn't want to make up with her at all. She fiddled with her hair in embarrassment and insisted it was none of his business. Inori wearily covered his face with his hand, thinking this was getting nowhere. This wasn't working. He would have to use his trump card. He mentioned that it was Rado who had made a mistake. He explained that Rado did all of this to help her, but if she didn't want the help, that was fine. Of course, Rado would be heartbroken to hear about it. All his hard work would be for nothing. This made Amanda anxious, and she quickly asked him to stop saying she wanted to explain everything. But she was very hesitant, so he had to persuade her to finally speak. To compose herself, she began fiddling with her hair and explained that things used to be different. They were once very close, and her sensible sister often played with her. Her sister used to follow her everywhere, but they began to drift apart when Amanda turned 7 years old and was given the title of First Princess. She was told that her sister was not her mother's biological daughter, and that's when everything started to change. She had to study hard every day to become a proper queen, and a time came when she realized just how sweet and kind her sister, the other princess, truly was. She dreamed of spending time with her again, just like they used to, but the elders around her wouldn't allow it, and a rift formed between them. She looked down sadly, then turned to Inori and said his job was done. Now he understood what the first princess was really like. Her pride and arrogant behavior were simply a result of her upbringing. The lack of uniformity in her room was just one example. She had no identity of her own. Everything had been imposed upon her. To avoid losing herself completely, she was simply clinging to her status as a princess for dear life. She became embarrassed and asked him to say something. After all, who was she to be telling him all this? And would he even consider her advice? She immediately took back her words, her pride getting the better of her. Inori then asked why she didn't just go talk to her sister directly. He suggested, "Just say, 'Let me call you sister.'" Blushing, Amanda replied that she could never say something like that. What would her courtiers and servants think? He asked with a smile. "Are servants more important than princesses in this country? Don't you get to decide things for yourself? What did their opinions matter? After all, she was the first princess." Inori added that her sister was stronger than she thought, so she shouldn't be concerned. Amanda seriously contemplated this. After a moment, she said hesitantly that she could handle things herself and didn't require his advice, but she was grateful that he had listened. Afterwards, he left her room and went back to his own. He told Nala everything, and she honestly admitted that while she wasn't thrilled with the idea, she would consider his advice. He thought to himself that it wasn't the most enthusiastic response. Well, it was the second princess's problem now. The next morning, the other princess came to his room to deliver a message. Although he had just woken up, he saw Nala greeting him. He asked what was up, and with a smile, she told him that this time everything would be different. Today's lesson was going to be a special one, which gave him a strange sense of unease. Eventually, they both dragged him out of the palace. Out on the street, he asked what kind of lesson awaited him. Arya explained that studying the flow of commerce and the mood of the people is just as important as physical training. She added that as a representative of the upper class, he would be accompanying her on a shopping trip. He just shot her a tired look. He had no idea what shopping had to do with his training. Their first stop was a jewelry store, and Arya was completely engrossed in choosing a piece, frowning in concentration. He wondered what this had to do with him if she was the one buying something. However, she seemed unable to choose a single piece. It was getting difficult, so she asked our hero for help. He told her that anything she picked would look good on her, but she shyly clarified that she wasn't buying it for herself. He looked at her confused until Nala whispered in his ear that Arya was choosing a birthday gift for the first princess. Nala explained that after a conversation they'd had the previous night, Arya decided she urgently needed to get a gift for her younger sister. He said he understood, but he wondered why he was the one being asked to choose the gift. Arya thoughtfully asked, "Didn't you see her yesterday?" She thought that meant he would have a good idea of what to pick. He replied that, unfortunately, even after seeing the princess, he didn't understand her taste at all, but he did notice she seemed unaccustomed to receiving gifts. He added that she probably wouldn't like just any gift. A little annoyed, Arya asked if he meant that giving a gift was a bad idea. He replied that the person giving the gift is more important than the gift itself. Therefore, he figured that whatever she chose would be the best choice. Nala smiled, thinking to herself how cute he was being while all he could think about was getting back to the palace. Arya smiled at his words and finally chose a gift. While Arya was paying, Nala told our hero that if he hadn't spoken up, she never would have been able to persuade Arya to get a birthday gift for the first princess. Arya smiled as she looked at the box in her hands, and Nala was overjoyed. Finally, our hero saw her genuine smile. Just then, Arya walked over to them. She asked what they were talking about, which made Nala extremely nervous. She quickly changed the subject and offered to get them breakfast. 5 days later, the MC received an invitation to the first princess's birthday party. He got dressed up and headed to the banquet hall. He found a spot in a corner where he could see the entire hall and thought to himself that the party was as brilliant as ever, filled with the usual conceited fools. Thunderous applause echoed through the hall as everyone rose to congratulate the birthday girl. Princess Amanda entered the banquet hall, instantly capturing everyone's attention. Her parents watched her smiling proudly. Our hero gave a slight bow and greeted the princess. The princess was delighted to see him. He wished her a happy birthday and told her she looked even more beautiful today than she did yesterday. She smiled genuinely, enjoying the compliment. To our hero, it seemed she wasn't shy in the slightest. In the crowd, he saw Arya talking to a man he didn't recognize. He wondered who the man was because he didn't carry himself like the other nobles. His identification skill revealed that the man was the Prime Minister of the state. He figured they were probably discussing national security. He knew there was no time to interrupt them, so he began to look around the banquet hall for Arya instead. He found her hiding behind a pillar watching her sister. She was clearly afraid to approach her. It was difficult for him to watch. Was it really that hard for her to call out to her own sister, or was the distance between them just too great to cross? He decided to give her a little push. When he walked up to her, she asked what he was doing. He just told her that he was about to do something and that she shouldn't take it too seriously. After all, he still remembered how badly she'd kicked him before. Before she could react, he gave her a firm push into the middle of the hall. Her momentum carried her right toward her younger sister. She stumbled to a stop, realizing she was now standing directly in front of Amanda. She completely panicked. Everyone in the hall was stunned into silence. Meanwhile, the MC looked on as if he had nothing to do with it. Amanda looked at her older sister in surprise as Arya shyly hid the gift box behind her back. The guests began to whisper, and our hero knew it was because of this unexpected reunion. He shot a look at Arya, silently gesturing for her to do something. She was completely unprepared for this. Terrified, Arya held out the box to her sister and wished her a happy birthday. To seal the deal, our hero announced loudly and enthusiastically that Arya had brought a gift in honor of the first princess's birthday. Amanda hesitated for a moment. Then she took the box. She opened it and was surprised to see the beautiful jewelry inside. She enthusiastically told Arya to put it in her hair for her right away. Arya was taken aback at first, but when Amanda pleaded, "Please," she smiled and got to work. Arya skillfully braided her sister's hair and fastened the clips. Blushing, Amanda turned to her and asked how she looked. Arya smiled and said that the clips looked wonderful on her. Amanda beamed and returned the smile, thanking her sister. At this, all the guests burst into applause. Everyone was truly happy to witness the sisters' reunion. It seemed Amanda had received more than just one gift from her sister that day. Amanda sought her out, but then fell silent for a moment. Embarrassed, she confessed to just calling Arya sister. Arya simply agreed, much to her relief. As Arya recalled their childhood friendship, he looked at her in surprise, his eyes welling up with tears. Arya replied that she was his sister, and he was overjoyed just to hear her say it. Amanda, in disbelief, immediately threw her arms around him, ecstatic that things were finally back to normal. She was happy they could finally spend time together again. Watching the reunion, the MC felt like his job was done. Then he noticed the king and queen also watching their daughter, weeping with joy. Rito approached him and apologized for leaving him to handle everything alone. But the MC was just happy Rito was there. He told him everything was fine and joked that he expected to be fully compensated for his trouble. Rito laughed, saying he'd think about it and that he was grateful. He admitted it was difficult seeing them at odds and was glad they had finally reconciled. He smiled at Arya, repeating how happy he was, and wondered if he was being too kind. He wanted to say something about his own heroic act, but instead of saying anything, he excused himself to get some fresh air. He went straight to the balcony and began to enjoy the sunset. Arya approached him, saying she had something important to discuss. Realizing they might not be alone, she immediately corrected herself. She politely asked if they could talk. He gave her permission to speak, as there was no one else around at the moment. She smiled and asked about his spy ability, remarking that such a practical skill must be a blessing. He gave her a cautious look, as she told him he should listen to his feelings more. He immediately shot back that she was the last person he wanted to hear that from. At that exact moment, back in the feast hall, blood sprayed from a blade. For a second, everything went completely silent. Inori quietly told the princess that if one listens to their conscience, no one would ever dare call her dull again. Then a loud scream suddenly pierced the silence. They both instantly turned toward the sound. Arya started to run inside to see what was happening. But he stopped her. The princess froze, her eyes locked on the horrifying scene before them. The queen's head had been completely severed from her shoulders. The prime minister announced that the queen and the king had both been killed. The feast hall filled with the terrified screams of the guests. The assassin strictly ordered them to be silent. The guards took no action, meaning this was all planned in advance. The killer shouted that the king had done nothing to stop the country's decline. The queen wasted the treasury on her whims, and the king completely ignored the resulting chaos. Now that their downfall had come, the next ruler would be none other than the heir to the royal family. The heir who had betrayed her own family. Ayana slowly approached the throne and announced that she would now be the queen. The MC gritted his teeth in panic. He saw Amanda standing in the middle of the hall right next to her mother's severed head. Amanda stared at her mother's face in deep shock before unleashing all of her magical power. She screamed in pure rage, yelling that they were all completely insane. She raised her hand, preparing to unleash a powerful magic spell. But Ayana instantly appeared before her. A swift strike from her sharp sword prevented Amanda from casting her spell. The sword sliced off some of her hair in one of her hands. Her hairpin clattered to the ground, and the heroes called out her name in terror. Rue was about to run to her aid, but the leader of the knights ordered him to stay put. The knight leader warned that if they attacked, they would meet the same fate. Meanwhile, Bathory shouted that they were all daughters of witches. He accused them of blindly following their own selfish desires, even summoning heroes, and proclaimed they had created a mess that could only be cleansed by death. Amanda slumped to the ground. Seeing the hairpin, she remembered her sister and began to cry bitterly. Then Ayana killed her, shouting that she would meet the witch in the afterlife. As Amanda's head fell to the ground, Arya's face filled with terror. She was utterly devastated, her mouth hanging open. Inori realized she was about to scream his name, so he immediately clamped a hand over her mouth. He frantically whispered for her to stay quiet or they would be caught. He looked at Ayana, wondering if this was all a trap. The knights surrounded them, ready to follow their orders. Bathory ordered the knights into action. He commanded them to send all the nobles to their favorite witch as punishment for their sins. The nobles tried to run in fear, but the knights quickly chased them down and slaughtered them. Bathory spread his arms, enjoying the massacre. He looked up at the drops of blood flying through the air and listed all their crimes. Power grabs, bribery, wasteful spending, and complete indifference. He declared that with their power, they had ruined the country. Therefore, they all deserved to die. Arya was terrified after witnessing the entire scene. The MC told her to calm down, warning that if she moved, they would kill her. He said they had only two options: die here for nothing, or escape and survive. As the massacre continued, Ryu reached Amanda's body. He fell to his knees before her. He shouted that she didn't deserve to die. Bathory retorted that all the nobles who had neglected their country deserved their fate. He turned and said there was no reason to kill them. After a moment's thought, the other man retorted that he wouldn't be saying that if he'd seen what they had. One day, he vowed, "I'll show him this country's true face." Ayana was ordered to capture the heroes. She approached Lady Ratto and warned her not to resist, or she would face hell. He immediately rose, channeling his power. Summoning his saber of light, he launched a powerful strike against the master. But he remained completely unharmed. His barrier formed from swords absorbed the entire blow. The master commented that it was very impressive, acknowledging that both the hero's power and his reaction speed were amazing. Gritting his teeth in frustration, he attacked again with even more force. The master effortlessly blocked each strike, and the banquet hall slowly began to collapse around them. As their swords clashed and sliced through a pillar, Ovi saw it start to topple. She immediately threw up a protective shield. Tamaki told her they needed to help the others escape, but Ovi said it was impossible. There were just too many soldiers. Tamaki pointed out angrily that they didn't even have any weapons. Meanwhile, Ayana saw her opponent, the hero Ratto, panting after their brief clash. She remarked that Ratto had made the decision to fight. How unfortunate, Ayana mused, because now you can't escape. She swung her sword and Ratto barely managed to block the strike. Ayana asked what she would do next. She could fight to her last breath, but she still wouldn't be able to win. She should just surrender. Ayana declared she would capture them all and then go after the other princess. Meanwhile, Arya was crying. Inori decided it was time to act, apologizing as she told Arya to stop grieving. "But if we stay here, we'll end up in the same situation," Inori explained. They had a choice: surrender and die, or run and stay alive. She clenched her fists. Inori asked, "Are you just going to give up again?" Arya looked at her for a moment. Then, with renewed confidence, she declared that she refused to give up. She would fight for Amanda until her last breath. She would live, and no one could tell her otherwise. Inori looked at her in surprise, then smiled. "Arya," she said, "in that case we have to escape." All the while, the battle raged on. Ratto's sword couldn't handle the pressure from Ayana's attack and shattered, leaving her in shock. She realized this was the end. Ayana then kicked her in the stomach, sending her flying. The blow was so powerful that Ratto was knocked out instantly. Seeing this, Tamaki cried out Ratto's name in concern. When she didn't move, Tamaki realized how serious the situation was. If they didn't run now, they would be killed too. But first, they had to save Ratto. At that moment, Ayana approached them and with a single swing of her sword shattered Ovi's shield. This left them completely defenseless. Ayana then ordered her soldiers to arrest them immediately. The soldiers threw the girls to the ground, causing Ovi to scream. Tamaki immediately tried to stand up for her. Ayana ordered for her friends to be taken to the dungeon. She glanced worriedly at Seiru, wondering if he had dragged the fight on for too long. Meanwhile, the princess and Inori had started their escape. Ayana noticed, but thought it didn't matter. The outcome would be the same. She didn't think the princess could survive alone. All this time, as the MC led the princess down the hallway, he had been using his powers. This left him extremely tired. He told her they couldn't go straight ahead and had to turn left. They sprinted away from the pursuing soldiers. The princess thought that he spotted the guards so easily it was as if he'd had special training. She called out to him, asking if he could use magic. He told her that he could only use the most basic magic. Then he grabbed her hand and said, "In about 10 seconds, 3 guards are coming around that corner. You'll have to deal with them somehow." She looked at him confused and asked, "Isn't running away an option?" He replied that it would be difficult since they had nowhere left to run. She swallowed nervously and then began chanting. "Are there only 3 of them?" she asked. He warned her that she only had 2 seconds left. As soon as the soldiers' shadows appeared on the ground, she cast her spell and a gust of wind knocked them off their feet. They fell to the ground immediately. The MC stepped out from his hiding spot. He saw that she had taken down all 3 of them with a single spell. He noted that they must have been prepared, as they clearly didn't expect the attack. "It's a good thing everything worked out," he added. Noticing his heavy breathing, she said he seemed exhausted. "Are you okay?" she asked. He admitted he was tired, but said the enemy wouldn't care about that. There were almost no guards up ahead. They just had to get there first. The MC frowned and kept running forward. He thought that while they could probably handle ordinary soldiers, he couldn't take on the knight's commander. He himself wasn't in any condition to fight. He told her that she just needed to go on ahead without him. He thought to himself that she was a special case. Then his heavy breathing subsided. Peeking around the corner, he noted that there were no guards in this area. "There isn't a single living soul in that room," he said. We'll hide there, wait, and plan our escape." Arya looked at him in surprise. "Not a single living soul," she asked. "But that's the staff room." They moved forward and found a large blood stain on the floor. Peeking inside the room, they saw several dead bodies. The hero looked away and thought grimly, "Of course there are no guards here. They aren't needed." They had killed everyone, even the servants. He realized how much thought had gone into this. Then Arya mentioned Nala. The girl had sat down near the body, reaching out a hand. The hero remembered how he had embraced her. He recalled Nala's words, remembering her smile as she said how wonderful it was to see Arya happy again. He silently embraced Arya's lifeless form. He continued watching her. She began to cry, but then turned her face away and said, "Inori, everything is fine. It's all okay." She was thankful that she had waited. He was breathing on his own, but how would they escape? Meanwhile, Ayana reached for the bars and drew a magical sigil. She explained that the royal dungeon was designed to hold the most dangerous criminals. Without magical tools, they would never escape. They had to remain silent and still. "How cruel," Tamaki said. "Can't you at least take off our handcuffs?" she asked. Rado replied, "It's no use, Tamaki. If summoning heroes could have stopped the coup, the Hero Alliance wouldn't have just stood by," he said, raising his eyebrows. "They've handcuffed us to buy time and to make sure we don't accidentally kill ourselves. Isn't that right?" Ayana looked at him and said, "There's nothing more to discuss." His body was filled with rage, but his mind was perfectly clear. He glared at her, exuding a frightening aura. Ayana felt like she had seen those eyes somewhere before. She remembered standing surrounded by corpses. She was thinking about her own stupidity, her helplessness, and how unprepared she was for this nightmare. They were the same eyes she once had. Then she turned to him and said that he was still young. "Well, if you want to survive in this world, you must remember this feeling," she advised. "You need to think of a better way. I wish I'd handled things properly back then. If you had done something right, I might have considered letting Ovi and Tama go." Then she left as Guy and Rue yelled angrily after her, "Why are you still acting like a teacher?" Just then, as Ayana was climbing the stairs, someone else leaned against the wall and said, "They haven't found what he just gave them yet." He was doing better than expected. After retrieving her belongings, she announced that another princess would be joining the search. They needed to move on. The guards running after them yelled, "Yes, sir." Meanwhile, Arya said, "If we have to start somewhere, this is the best place." She pointed to the blueprint. Looking at it, the hero asked, "Is there something there?" She answered that it was a secret door leading to the underground sewers. "Through them, we can escape the castle," she explained. He agreed that was the plan. "But isn't that a path only the royal family knows about?" he asked. She looked at him and answered, "Yes, it's exclusively for the royal family. It's an emergency exit for us," she explained. "But to be honest, I don't know if it's still accessible." Then he stood up and said, as if they had no other choice, "We have to go." He also climbed up and looked toward the drain. He thought of Nala, apologizing that he couldn't help her but thankful for everything. After that, he left the room. Inori ran ahead. He looked around and thought, "This is bad. The number of guards is increasing." Arya noticed his concern and asked what was wrong. "Inori," she asked again. He looked ahead, knowing it was only a matter of time before they were caught. He kept running, thinking, "There are 12 people on the right. There are more behind us and ahead of us." He grabbed Arya's hand, pulling her to a stop. She looked at him as he panted. "It's an ambush. These aren't just a dozen puppets," he said. "We won't be able to get past them. It's not possible to go back either," he said, glancing behind them. "The soldiers are right on our tail." Arya asked, "So we can't leave without being seen?" "Absolutely not," he answered. "And it seems a lot of people know about that secret door. It has been completely sealed." Arya looked down. "They've either tortured my family for information, or they already knew about the route," she reasoned. The escape route was gone. "What a mess," he thought, looking at her. "This is it then. Can we really make it through this together?" he wondered. "If we're going to survive this, there's only one way." Then she said firmly that she wouldn't give up. She looked up at him and declared loudly that they wouldn't kill her that easily. "I'll fight to the very end," she vowed. They looked at each other in surprise. Then the hero smiled. "I knew you were still in there. You're someone I can count on." Then he said, "Listen, it's been confirmed that a contingent from another country's army is heading this way." She cried out in surprise. "An army?" He held out his hands. "Well, I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "Besides their soldiers, there are other people with them too." "They're coming to rescue the royal family," she yelled. "And when will they arrive?" He replied, "Around sunset. If we can just hold out for 15 minutes, we have a chance of surviving." "But we can't avoid a fight," she pointed out. He replied, "Right." He thought to himself, a 50-50 chance of surviving until sunset. Then he ran forward and shouted, "We need to run to where there are the fewest soldiers. I'll draw them away." "Okay," she replied. Just then, the guard spotted them. "There they are," one shouted, pointing. "It's the second princess, get her." The captain raised his hand, gesturing forward as he yelled, "Shower them with magic arrows." His men unleashed a volley of magical projectiles. Arya turned and cast a protective magic circle. "It's only 15 minutes, right, Inori?" she screamed. "We'll definitely make it out of here." In the next moment, several magical arrows pierced her. The hero screamed. They suddenly disappeared behind a wall. The arrows slammed into the wall where they had just vanished. "Surround the fugitives!" the warrior commander shouted. The MC knew they were in deep trouble. "They're running faster than I expected," he noted. "They've gotten farther too." Someone shouted, "If more soldiers show up, how are you going to stop them?" "On your left," Arya yelled. In that instant, a magic circle materialized across their path. A guard stopped in his tracks, shouting in surprise, "A magic circle, how?" But the commander ordered them not to hesitate. "We have to break through." A guard then struck the magic circle with his weapon, shattering the barrier into tiny pieces. Looking back, the hero racked his brain, trying to figure out how to escape being surrounded. They kept running forward until they finally reached a room. The hero glanced out the window and saw that sunset was just moments away. "The way is blocked," Arya yelled in surprise. He looked at her apologetically as they were now surrounded by soldiers. All other paths were blocked, and there were only 3 minutes left until sunset. "We have to hold them off until then," he said, turning to face the guards. "They're here," he shouted. The commander ordered a magical volley of arrows. Arya screamed as she erected a barrier in front of them. Get back," she yelled. At that moment, a guard turned to his commander and shouted, "Do you want us to attack?" "No, don't get any closer or you'll be killed," he replied. "Just keep attacking them from a distance." The guards roared as they fired another volley of magical arrows. Another volley. Arya panted, her strength nearly gone. She focused once more on the magic sigil protecting them. She raised an eyebrow. "Cracks are starting to form," she observed, but thankfully not in any critical spots. A barrage of magical arrows flew forward, causing a small explosion. "Another volley," the commander yelled. A large crack spiderwebbed across Arya's barrier. Panting, she managed to create a new barrier. She turned slightly and said, "Help is on the way." "Right," Inori replied. At that moment, one of the guards smiled to himself. "Perfect. They haven't even tried to counterattack. A little more and they're ours for the taking." Suddenly his eyes widened and he shouted, "Wait, one of them is missing." Meanwhile, a trembling Arya collapsed to the ground, her eyes fixed on a black puddle forming before her. Using her hands, Arya pushed herself up. She looked around frantically, yelling, "Inori, where is she?" She furrowed her brow, trying to understand what happened. Had Inori tricked her? He had said they needed to escape together, that he was there to help. Was it all just a lie so he could fight by himself? Was it all a lie? She wondered. Just then a guard shouted, "Keep your eyes open." Another volley. Finish her off. That should do it. But at that very moment, the sun disappeared completely below the horizon. The MC smiled. "I did say I was sorry." But now it's my turn." The guards were stunned by the sudden pitch-black darkness. "We need a light source." "How is this possible?" "Get a light now, I can't see anything." Just then, the hero spoke to his companion. "Fenrir, I'll leave them to you." "Yes, master, what?" Yasuit replied. In the next instant, baring its fangs, it lunged at several guards at once. The others screamed in the dark. "What was that? Who's there?" report. The remaining guards frantically searched for their comrades, only to find their lifeless bodies. What is that thing?" one of them stammered. "Where's the commander?" "Do a head count." "Hey, are you all deaf?" one shouted. At that moment, the MC appeared behind him and asked, "Are you deaf?" The guard spun around in utter shock. "Inori. Where did you come from?" he yelled. At that moment, the hero glanced over. "Fenrir, are you finished?" The guard flinched as Fenrir appeared right behind him. "Only your left," the beast growled. The hero then added, "A swarm of deaf fools. You shouldn't compare yourself to them." Terrified, the guard backed against the wall, screaming for help. The MC casually reminded him, "I've already killed plenty of people. Haven't I? So you really shouldn't be surprised when someone decides to treat you the same way, right?" "Are you really Inori?" the frightened guard yelled. "Who knows?" he replied. The next moment, Fenrir's jaws closed around the guard's head. Meanwhile, Arya, still on the ground, whispered Inori's name. He glanced over and saw the magic sigil on her as she silently used her last ounce of strength to heal herself. A good effort, he thought to himself. But she's lost too much blood. It's far too late. With her remaining strength, she looked at him and asked, "This power, were you like this all along?" He told her not to pry. "This power only appears after sunset. That's why I told you to hold out until then," he explained. "It's also why I had to lie." He hadn't actually needed her help to be saved. He just wanted to see how fiercely she would fight once he gave her that sliver of hope. He remembered the look in her eyes, so full of determination. Even on the brink of death, she kept fighting. If she has that will to survive, he thought, then why not? Then he said to her, "There's no time to beat around the bush, so I'll ask you directly. Have you ever been intimate with a man?" She stared back in shock. "What?" she exclaimed. "If the answer is no, you get to live," he replied, looking at her with a serious expression. "However," he continued, "you will have to obey my every command. In other words, you'll become my slave. So choose, embrace death as a human or forsake your humanity. And live." It was her choice. With what little dignity she had left, she answered, her mind flashing back to the memory of a stream. "No matter what happens, I'll sell my soul to the devil himself if it means I get to live." He smiled. "Good, an honest answer. You're closer to a devil than a god anyway." He said this with a fanged grin and leaned toward her neck. The next instant, a strange energy spread throughout her entire body. After a while, the hero turned to his companion. "Once you've finished cleaning up the bodies here, go take care of the remaining soldiers. And protect her until she wakes up." "Understood," Fenrir replied. Nearby, Arya sat leaning against the wall, her eyes peacefully closed. Looking out the window, she remarked that she was going to go have some more fun. A short while later, guards appeared before the king and knelt. One of them cried out, "Your Majesty, it's a betrayal." The second guard reported, "The second princess is surrounded. The ruler declared that." He believed the start of the rebellion was near. They were not to be allowed to escape. The guard replied, "Yes, Your Majesty." The king lamented, "Hunger and poverty are ravaging the country like a plague, and I have been caught in its grip, abandoning the orphans." He felt he was just like them, and the guilt was his to bear. He felt powerless. Looking up, he said, "There is a long road ahead, but together we will make this country what it was always meant to be." In that instant, the MC's shadow appeared, behind the king, pointing its own weapon at him. A guard screamed in panic. Ayana, standing in the corridor, heard the scream. She frowned, wondering, what is this strange feeling? Just then, the king's head toppled from his body. It fell to the floor, separated from his shoulders. The hero held the head aloft as Leah and the others present screamed in horror. Declaring it a betrayal, the MC announced that the king's plan had failed. "Now," he asked the stunned guards, "you have no reason left to fight, so what will you do?" "Kill the foolish king for his betrayal," they chanted. The hero gathered energy around him, forming several daggers of pure power. "Very good," he said. "If you've decided to kill someone, you must be prepared for the consequences." With those words, he plunged the magical weapons into the bodies of the warriors. He goaded them, "If you're ready to fight to the bitter end, then I'll be more than happy to oblige." Painful screams echoed through the hall. At that moment, Miranda looked to her side and yelled, "Did you hear that?" Alice looked at her and cried out, "Yes, someone's screaming." They all moved forward. "Let's check the main hall," one of them said. Then Maria stopped dead in her tracks. She saw the hero standing in the center of the chaos, radiating dark energy. He turned his gaze toward her group. "If I'm not mistaken," he said, "you must be the personal combat detachment under the command of Captain Ayana, correct?" Maria frowned and shouted back, "Inori, is all this you're doing?" she demanded. The MC smirked. "And if I answer your question, will you fight me with everything you've got?" At that moment, an elf in their group glared at him, gritting her teeth in fury. She raised her weapon and charged him. "Elf, no!" Maria screamed, but it was too late. The next moment, the elf plunged her weapon deep into the hero's chest. Tears streamed down the elf's face. The hero was surprised to see such raw emotion. Did I accidentally kill someone dear to her? He wondered. Just then, the elf realized the man she had stabbed was not the main character, but someone else entirely. Ridiculous. The MC's voice echoed, revealing his illusion. "This is what happens when you let your anger blind you." With those words, he landed several swift blows on the girl's body. Maria screamed in shock, thinking the fight would end with a single decisive blow. But it didn't. "No," she yelled. "Miranda, get ready. He's dangerous. Finish him off." The entire squad began gathering their energy. Maria stared at the hero thinking, the elf pierced him without a moment's hesitation. She didn't know what drove the elf, but she knew the MC couldn't possibly survive a fatal blow. Just then, the hero activated one of his analysis skills. His eyes fell on Maria's weapon, and he thought, a magical weapon. That doesn't look like the standard issue equipment given to ordinary soldiers. Then he looked down at his feet, which were being rapidly covered in frost. Miranda was directing her energy at him. Freeze him, she shouted. Alice gathered energy in her hand and yelled, he's mine now. She unleashed a powerful stream of energy directly at him, but the MC simply swatted it away with his hand. The MC was shaken. Is her body also a weapon? He thought, impressed by her extraordinary speed and strength. The very next moment, another attack grazed his face, drawing blood. Maria rushed forward. Turning back for a second, she thought, it's over. But just then, the hero smiled. This weapon is a much bigger problem than I thought, he mused. In the next instant, he leaped into the air just as his feet were about to be frozen solid in a block of ice. He's still alive, Maria screamed. He's trying to evade our attacks, but it's a useless gesture, she thought. As soon as he lands, he'll be served up on a silver platter. But then she heard loud screams. It was Miranda and Alice. The girls were already lying on the ground defeated. Maria rushed to them, crying out, damn it! The hero simply placed a hand on his face, as if tired. Smiling, he said, if it were any other day, I would have thoroughly enjoyed this coordinated attack. But, he continued, my schedule is a bit tight at the moment, so if you don't mind, I'd like to have a one-on-one dance with you. Maria glared at him. He took a step forward. This will be the best warm-up before my deadly fight with Ayana. Maria repeated in disbelief, a fight with Captain Ayana. He's got some nerve, she thought, activating her own ability. He must be the strongest one here, right? It'll be easier to just fight him myself, she resolved, momentarily forgetting about her fallen comrades. But no, they're still here with me. Why? Irritated, Maria clicked her tongue. Then she leaped off the ground and pounced on him. Be quiet, she yelled. She swung her weapon at him, shouting, don't talk like you know anything. He effortlessly shattered her dagger. Then from a cloud of darkness, he summoned a second dagger and parried her attack. He raised an eyebrow, thinking, she has talent, but will she be able to handle me? He suddenly remembered how Ayana had recruited him, tapping him on the shoulder. He recalled her saying to Maria's group, listen up, we need to stick together. I hope you'll all get along. The rest of the girls had looked at Maria, then immediately surrounded her with cheer. Ayla had hugged her and cried, she's joining us! We're short on people, Ayana had explained. Do you understand the rules? Miranda had then asked Maria. So what kind of books do you like? Alice had happily introduced herself. Snapping back to the present, Maria's expression hardened. How dare you, she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. Humiliate my friends like that. I will never forgive you, she declared. The hero just looked at her with an amused expression and shouted back, now that's a different story. What tremendous courage. Fenrir thought to himself, gotta keep up the good work. At that moment, he pointed toward his opponent, realizing, well, it looks like I'll have to fight him. The next moment, he was startled to see her flying right beside him. She had arrived. He secured his sword with magical threads as she hoisted him up, shouting, come on, get up! We will avenge the elf, he declared. Then he turned to face the hero, only to realize she wasn't alone. She had a whole squad of warriors with her. Just then, Alice sank her teeth into his neck. He grabbed his head in shock. A moment later, he watched in surprise as Minda bit another target in the armpit, making him scream. Miranda apologized to the MC, but he simply said she was asking for it. Then they noticed someone had turned into a ghost. The elf hero yelled, challenging him to a fight. I had a lot of fun, he said, but ideally, I wanted to take a little more time with this. But alas, with his hands full, he headed for the exit, looking shaken. He told them they could do whatever they wanted. At that same moment, Maria, one of the transformed girls, was standing right beside him. Their hands were outstretched ready to bite when Maria yelled, Inori! The next instant, drops of blood flew everywhere. The MC stepped outside and announced, the powerful warrior is still alive. At that very moment, his soldiers were busy fighting the palace guards. Ayana paced down the corridor, contemplating the strange feeling that was welling up in her chest. She stopped in the main hall and glanced to the side. She figured that in moments like these, she was just following her natural instincts. Then she knelt beside the severed head and picked it up. She thought to herself that he was someone who would never deceive her. Looking at the dead man's face, she murmured, Mr. Betrayer. Hey, betrayer. At that very moment, the hero spread his wings and asked, the moon is beautiful tonight, isn't it? It was a line that everyone in this world knew. He gave her a teasing look. Inori, who was smiling, then said that the head was a gift from him. He then placed the head on the ground. Inori asked, "Should I even ask, are those demonic wings?" He glanced at his wings, then looked ahead. "This is what happens to anyone who strives for this kind of power. You sell yourself to demons." Then he asked, "And what about him now?" "He'll get to live, but only because he gave up his human pride first," the hero explained. She stared at him in surprise. He continued, "I don't completely understand it myself, but I just live. No complications." She shouted back, "There's no place in this world for someone who lives for a trivial reason like just because." She beat her chest, declaring that she was fighting for her country. He stood still looking at her and cried out, "There's no way to live in this world without a reason. I understand that too. Whether it's for a family, personal desire, or revenge, you've chosen your path." Lowering her gaze, she clenched her fist and said, "If only someone had taught him properly. Maybe he wouldn't have become a monster." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He put a hand to his face, then turned to look at her. He stepped closer and said, "I applaud your teaching philosophy, I really do. But I'm still a monster, and you're still acting like I'm your student." "Yes, I'm the one who killed your leader, and the coup is over," he stated. "If the country itself no longer exists, what's the point in fighting?" She replied, "Even without His Majesty, we are still here." He cut her off, saying, "Ayana, I think you feel that something is missing." She looked at him surprised. At that exact moment, several monstrous creatures emerged from the walls carrying the bodies of the guards in their jaws. The MC announced, "He is no more. We've massacred all the soldiers who followed him and everyone else in the palace." The war girls were left with nothing. He noted that she was the only one left whose hands and legs were tied. They should be saved too. She could do it if she sacrificed herself. With that, he sat down on Miranda's dead body. Looking into the distance, he thought about how he'd finally gotten the chance to fight a worthy warrior. But in the end, it turned into a battle between a master and a disciple, and he had been put under moral pressure to essentially give up. What would have happened if I'd been forced to fight for real, he wondered. Then he stroked one of the creatures beside him and thought that this was all getting a bit boring. The very next moment she sighed and said, "All right, forget about saving them. It's better to return with him to that moment when he was left all alone. The rest of the soldiers will be fine," she declared. Just then the hero was surprised to see Ayana draw her weapon. He asked what she was doing. She plunged her sword into the ground before her and offered a silent prayer for the warriors who had fallen and for those who were about to. Then she opened her eyes, gathering energy within her body. She shouted that their sacrifice would not be in vain. The hero extended his hand toward her and finally asked, "Have you decided to sacrifice your organization?" He was asking her to sacrifice them, the very people she had trained her entire life. Did she truly have the right to sacrifice everything? He said with surprise, "Without its ruling class and its army, the country will cease to exist. It won't be a country anymore." She stepped forward and countered, "But the people will still be here. It doesn't matter if the elite class is corrupt or if the army falls apart. None of that matters. As long as the people remain, they will fight for their country." An aura flared up around her entire body. "This is my reason for living." Seeing this, the hero broke into a manic grin. She asked, "Why are you so happy?" He hid his smile behind his hand. "My apologies, Captain," he said. "I underestimated you. I'm sorry for that mistake. It was wrong of me to lie and cheat you. I'll be honest now." In that moment, the transformed black wolves dropped the guards they were holding. The MC explained, "They've all reverted to their original forms. They're too far gone. Their bodies can't become vampires and they can't be saved. All of my old friends died a long time ago." At that moment, the vampires began to advance. The hero gestured towards the fallen soldiers and said, "To them, this is just a fresh meal." Ayana lowered her gaze and said that Inori couldn't be saved either. She threw her weapon, and its light spread out in all directions. She added that her enemy, the MC, spread his wings, gritted his teeth, and flew away in retreat. Then Ayana swung her sword. The force of it caused everyone around her to scatter. The hero frowned, thinking, "Oh, this is much more serious than I thought." So this is Ayana's trump card. She was holding an ancient weapon. The hero took out several daggers, thinking he couldn't take down all the vampires at once. They were like a wall. He decided to focus only on her. Their eyes met, and the hero held his daggers at his side. He holstered his weapons. He shouted, "Captain Ayana, I am your true enemy. I will use my full strength as well." The guards moved toward him, but she just watched him silently. Then, swinging her weapon as she advanced on the guards, she sliced off all their limbs. The MC smiled. They were still his old companions after all. She hasn't forgotten, has she? We'll see just how far she can go." At that moment, a group of warriors charged toward him. She turned her gaze toward them. Remembering his smile, she launched a powerful attack, knocking down everyone in her path. The hero made a few more attacks on her companions and asked, "What are you just going to stand there and watch? Why aren't you attacking? If you just stand still, I'll have to strike first." "I will." The hero thought this was understandable, but it was better to avoid any attacks from behind. Her strength wasn't diminishing, and he knew he couldn't last in a direct confrontation. A little while earlier, Arya had asked in surprise why Captain Ayana was so powerful. She had stepped away from the strategy board. She'd said thoughtfully, she was never timid, not even from the beginning. But she became even stronger when she was made captain and the queen handed her an ancient weapon. The hero asked about the ancient weapon. He replied that if he wasn't mistaken, it was a sword whose edge could be enhanced by any magic. Meanwhile, Ayana was relentlessly attacking. She was cutting the guards into little pieces. The hero aimed his daggers at her, but she easily shattered them. The hero shouted with a frown, "Even my black magic-infused daggers turn to dust. Is there any limit to this sword's sharpness?" Just then he looked at the sword in her hands and realized it could literally cut through anything. Then Ayana looked ahead. A contracting magic circle hammered the wall with a powerful blow. The MC was stunned. He felt the attack hit his wing, and the thought suddenly materialized into magic. Ayana looked at him and said, "You won't be able to fly anymore." "What now?" He began to slide down the wall. Trying to slow his descent, he started digging his daggers into the wall. He thought that at this rate he would get very close to her. "Here I come." He then aimed his weapon at her, but she kept swinging her sword, blocking his every attack. He thought he needed to stop her now. And suddenly, in that very moment, he accelerated and jumped upward. To escape her attack, he positioned himself above her. He thought, "I've caught her." But then, startled, she jumped aside and managed to bite his hand. He dropped to one knee, turned to her, and said, "I really thought that would work. There's no other way, is there?" She turned to him and said that he was very flexible. "You could be an acrobat." He laughed and replied, "Unfortunately, I have no interest in that sort of thing." Just then he saw a system window appear above the sword. It read, "A sword made of pure mithril, an ancient weapon, a product of lost technology." So, a sword made of 100% pure mithril imbued with magic. It can be activated without any magic circle. He thought, so this is the source of her speed. He said aloud, "I see. This weapon is made of mithril, which is effective against demons." She saw that he understood very quickly. Just as the other princess had told her, he was surprisingly astute. He replied that he was grateful and moved closer. At that moment, the hero saw her point the sword at him. But she easily blocked his attack with her sword. She went on, "I've noticed you have many skills, but what's next?" He looked at her and asked, "Can I ask you something?" "What is it?" she replied. He asked her to answer a question for him. "Your reaction speed. You can respond to attacks immediately, even in the dark. That's what allows you to react so quickly. You cover yourself and your entire surroundings with a thin layer of magic. That's how you can trace anyone who tries to get close to you. Am I right?" he asked. She replied, "Yes, you're correct." Internally, the hero sighed, thinking that some abilities are just impossible to figure out. She said, "That's where you're wrong. Your ability continuously emits magic, so it was easy to figure out. It's not suitable for spying or covert operations, but it does significantly increase your reaction speed. It's very useful in battle." Then she took a step forward and said, "By the way, I can see your ability very well too. Did you notice?" she asked. He recalled how magic threads had appeared around Ayana, but she had simply turned her weapon and cut them off. The MC yelled in surprise, "She cut through that too." She then advanced, but at that moment Fenner saw several people appear right in front of him. They launched magical attacks, causing clouds of smoke to rise. The hero frowned, thinking about the distance. "They're attacking from outside too." Ayana asked, "Are they your friends as well? Attacking from the outside is a good idea, but it takes a lot of power to reach me from that far away. And it takes time," he thought. He realized she hadn't even used her ability. She had survived on pure reaction alone. The next moment, Ayana used her air hammer again, aiming straight for the ceiling while Fenrir leaped to the side. The hero turned and shouted, "Don't get too close. You have to keep attacking. He can't be allowed to rest, not even for a moment." In the next instant, he rushed forward, stabbing at Ayana several times. Pressing his advantage, he shouted, "Not bad, but how long can you last?" With a single stroke of his sword, he shattered several of her weapons. He turned slightly, wondering if he should fight until he completely ran out of magical power. No, he thought. She's been fighting nonstop for so long, there's no way she has much power left. Soon her summoned knives and life-draining attacks would be gone. She had to think. There had to be a way to defeat him. He had an ability that allowed him to detect any attack within a certain area, and on top of that, he had unlimited combat power to deal with countless foes. He wielded an ancient weapon that could even sever Gleipnir, and his reaction speed was so fast that ranged attacks were completely useless. He skidded to a halt, wondering how he could close the distance. He lunged forward to attack her at close range, but she was waiting for him, staying just out of his reach. What were his options? Retreat wasn't one of them. He had no choice but to push forward. At that exact moment, Ayana dodged a few more attacks. The hero looked at her and smirked, wondering if she really thought she could stop his assault just by focusing on defense. Then she shouted, "You're so naive, Inori. If you think you've seen all I can do, then you'd better think again." Saying this, she moved toward him, standing like a wall and stopping his advance. She sliced off his hand and declared, "It's all over now." Now, she thought, all I have to do is cut off Inori's head with a pure mithril sword so he can't grow it back. But at that very moment, the hero smiled and shouted, "No, it's not over yet." Ayana, at that very moment, a mouthful of Fenrir's teeth shot out from Ayana's own shadow and clamped onto her leg. Ayana watched, gritting her teeth in frustration. The hero continued, "The only thing that can get to a person without them noticing is their own shadow." Ayana thought angrily, "Should I take his head first? No, Inori is helpless without an arm. Now's the time to finish this." But when she looked at the hero, she froze in surprise. What? She saw that his hand had already grown back. "That grew back fast, didn't it?" he gloated. Ayana frowned and thought irritably, "Wrong sword. This one should have been made of pure mithril." The hero then closed the distance between them. She was surprised and started to think, then paused. He shouted, "What you remember this eye." Then he used his hypnosis ability. A magical sigil shot straight towards her, but in the next instant she sliced it in two with her sword. She laughed and thought, "So this sword can even cut through magic circles." The hero then mentally commanded Fenrir to back off. They stood facing each other. Fenrir's shadow began to emerge again, its jaws aimed at her feet. But she lowered her weapon and asked, "What is this now?" The hero replied, "Who knows?" She asked, "Why are you so happy?" He said it was because he was having fun. "Isn't it obvious you're having fun too, aren't you?" To which she replied, "Who knows?" They looked at each other, and the hero smiled, shouting, "Come on, Ayana." He attacked her several times, but she held her ground, parrying his blows with her own weapon. "Now it's time to end this," the hero thought. He adjusted the glove on his hand, and suddenly a magical sigil appeared behind Ayana's back. She spun around, thinking, "Another one of those circles, Udo." At that very moment, the hero appeared right behind her, causing her to cry out in surprise. "Perfect," he thought. She was distracted by the circle. If I grab her hand before she can attack, I've got her. He then grabbed her arm and opened his mouth wide to bite down. "This is bad," Ayana thought, gritting her teeth. "There's no surviving with a severed leg, and I won't have time to grab the mithril sword with my other hand. It's now or never." Air hammer. She gathered a powerful energy in her hand. Then she aimed the weapon at herself. The hero looked on in surprise as she slammed the hammer into her own sword hand. The force of the impact sent the edge of her sword flying into the hero's shoulder and neck, tearing his body to pieces. "Inori," Ayana thought, gritting her teeth. Then the hero's body and head fell to the ground in two separate pieces. The very next moment, Fenrir lunged at Ayana with its jaws wide open, but she spun around sharply and cut it down too. She leaned down to the hero's severed head and, breathing heavily, said, "Goodbye, Inori." Sometime later, as night fell, the last of the knights had been slain. They lay on the ground in pools of their own blood. Ayana, drenched in red, stood among the corpses and gazed up at the sky. She couldn't remember the last time she had fought so desperately down to her last breath, but it wasn't time to let her guard down yet. There was no time to relax. The other princess was still around. Suddenly, Ayana was attacked, sending a spray of blood into the air. Stunned by the pain, she realized in that same instant that the hero's most vital part, his head, was missing. Inori had used his magic. His headless body rose to its feet and attacked Ayana. She turned in surprise to see Inori's corpse, charging straight for her. The body kicked her hard, sending her stumbling back. Blood trickled from her mouth as the force of the blow slammed her against a wall. She was stunned for a moment. When her vision cleared, she saw Inori picking up his own severed head and placing it back on his neck. "That hurt, but everything's fine now," he said. Ayana commented, "So mithril is useless too." Inori replied that he already knew that. He explained that mithril was indeed effective against demons. However, that only applied to the demons of this world. It had no effect on someone like him who came from another world. Ayana was left speechless. Inori added that when she saw his arm get amputated, it only confirmed that mithril had no effect on him. Ayana realized he'd done it intentionally. By not reattaching his arm, he had cleverly proven his point. Inori stared at his opponent in silence. He had always assumed a vampire's most vital point was their head, but that wasn't the case at all. During his fight with Fender, his spine had been struck 2 or 3 times, yet he wasn't paralyzed. He had continued fighting as if nothing had happened. Now he finally understood a vampire's most crucial organ is their heart. He'd had his doubts about the theory, but never got a chance to test it. With a downcast expression, his opponent lowered his head and accepted his defeat. "I accept," the man said. Inori apologized that their duel was cut short as he was finally getting to enjoy a proper face-to-face battle. Ayana noted that his opponent didn't seem to have much experience. Inori commented that it made sense, since he was fighting as if it were his last stand. Ayana laughed, admitting she'd noticed that too. Suddenly, Inori's attention shifted elsewhere. He turned to her and said he would gladly make her his subject, but he felt she would quickly grow bored of that life, especially as a vampire. With that, he leaned in close and went to bite her. He opened his mouth, revealing sharp fangs, and with one final bite, he turned her. A short while later, footsteps echoed as someone descended the stairs. The sound drew closer, and a voice from behind them said, "Rado is in bad shape." The girls looked up in surprise as Inori approached. When they asked if he could help, he replied, "Yeah, I've got something. There's a magical tool that can open this cage." The girls were shocked to see he was completely fine, especially since they were just talking about how ancient and powerful the cage was. Inori kindly told them to worry about themselves first. Unable to stand it, Rado yelled, "What do you think you're doing?" Inori activated his magical eye, and Tamaki simply stood there stunned. He told Rado to calm down, assuring him he wasn't going to do anything bad. This only enraged him further, but Inori simply drew him closer. Suddenly, the man froze on the spot. His body started to tremble as he screamed, "What's happening?" He couldn't move an inch. Inori was surprised that Rado was still conscious. He thought to himself, the magic should have taken full effect by now. "So this technique's effectiveness depends on the victim's mental fortitude, does it?" he mused. He then taunted Rado, placing a hand on Ovi's head and asking for a small favor. He requested, "Could you clean this place up for me?" They needed to listen carefully to his instructions. Rado asked in shock, "You're making them clean." Inori explained that after everything that happened, he wanted everyone to believe he was dead. So he handed his staff to Tamaki, telling her she could use it to clean the entire palace. "Burn it all to ash. Don't leave a single body behind," Inori ordered. Tamaki hesitated. "You really want me to burn down the entire palace? Can I even do that?" Inori decided to let her in on a little secret. She was subconsciously suppressing her own power. He explained that if she released that restriction, she could do it with no problem at all. He then turned to Ovi and instructed her to go to the palace. He asked her to form a protective circle around it to contain the destruction. Ovi calmly replied that she understood. Rado screamed, "Stop, you're going to burn down the palace!" As Tamaki channeled her magic through the staff, she realized Inori was telling the truth. She could feel that this would be easy and that not a single trace of the palace would be left. Rado yelled that if they burned down the palace, everything they'd built would be lost. But before he could finish his sentence, Tamaki, now under Inori's influence, calmly said, "It's all right, I'll do it." Rado desperately tried to stop her. He screamed, but he was powerless to change what was about to happen, as Tamaki made her way inside the castle walls. Once she was inside, the palace erupted from within, and every inch of the building was engulfed in flames. Watching from a distance, Inori thought to himself, "Of course I did tell her to remove her limiter, but to think I can feel the heat even from outside the barrier, what incredible power." Suddenly, a frightened hero looked at Rado and asked, Can I really count on you?" After some time, the palace was nothing but ash, surrounded by raging flames. From within the blaze, Arya emerged calmly, observing the fire. She, the now fallen princess of the kingdom, had tragically watched every member of her family get killed. Closing her eyes, she recalled those painful memories before opening her newly transformed red eyes. Her hairstyle had changed completely as she stepped out of the flames. Hero appeared beside Inori and asked, Is it all over?" Arya asked him, "Finished with your cleaning?" Inori wondered how she knew that term. She explained that his knowledge and thoughts had merged with hers through his blood. She added that she never imagined her hair color would also change. Inori approached her and said, "That's because you are now my subject." He then joked that he was mostly just interested in her new hair color. Arya admitted she didn't really know what being a subject was supposed to feel like. Arya mentioned that, strangely, she found herself reacting to his thoughts and words as if they were connected. If I understand this correctly, she mused, it will be difficult for me to disobey or harm you. As she spoke, Inori took her hand in his. Then she suddenly slapped him across the cheek and recoiled in anger. Inori simply remarked that it wasn't a bad hit. Surprised, Arya turned back to see our hero trying to push himself up from the ground. While cupping his now red cheek, he commented that he thought her black hair suited her much better anyway. She just continued to stare at him in silence. A look of sadness washed over her face as the initial shock of the slap wore off. Seeing this, a smile spread across his face, realizing he had gotten through to her. Turning back to him, she admitted that not all was lost. He had saved her life, and she had also gained a degree of independence for which she was grateful. However, she also had a goal of her own. She wasn't entirely sure what it was yet, but she knew that if he became too powerful, she would just end up as his subordinate. I won't let that happen, she declared. The hero looked at her in surprise as Arya stared back confidently, vowing that one day she would grow stronger than him and win her freedom. He silently watched her walk away. He smiled to himself, deciding that if she could truly earn her freedom, he would let her have it. As he stood up, he announced that since the former princess had set her goals, it was time for them to go to his kingdom. A startled Arya immediately asked, "A kingdom? Where did you get a kingdom from?" He replied that he hadn't just been sitting around. He had found a place for them that would be much safer than staying in the city. A short while later, a bright pink light filled the sky. Arya watched in awe as a barrier was revealed, hiding their destination from the outside world once maintained by Fenrir and the local security. Here they would have the time and space to better understand their abilities. Inori led her into his new territory. Looking at the house, she asked where it came from. Inori explained that it was originally just a dilapidated old hut. He said that as an experiment, he had decided to create some tools and try fixing it up. "You created the tools?" Arya asked in surprise. He confirmed that he had, adding that he would tell her more about it later. "For now, you can consider this our base," he declared. Arya muttered that he certainly had a habit of dodging her questions. Once they were inside, Arya commented that it seemed a bit small for two people. He replied, "Compared to a palace, it's definitely a tight squeeze, but this is how we have to live now. You'll have to get used to it, especially since there's only one bed." Arya's face immediately turned beet red, and she fell silent for a moment, completely embarrassed. Then she suddenly sat next to him and declared that since she never really considered herself royalty, she had no objection to sharing a bed. After all, she was only alive because of him, and she didn't want to remain in his debt. Inori stared at her quietly as Arya continued explaining that this was the only way she could think of to repay him for now. Inori looked away, remarking that he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He was shocked that she'd made such an offer without being ordered to. Steeling herself, Arya said she was ready, so Inori promptly ordered her to take off her clothes. Blushing furiously, she hung her head but immediately stripped down right in front of him. She then yelled, asking if he was satisfied now. Inori, thinking about his omniscience and weapon creation skills, used his magic to create something extraordinary for her and told her to catch it. As Arya caught the object he'd tossed her, he looked at her again. "What is this?" she asked. He replied that she shouldn't be walking around in those tattered old rags and told her to put on the new clothes. He clarified that just because she was following his orders, it didn't mean she had to offer herself to him. He continued that he could choose any partner he wanted. She didn't need to offer her body in repayment. Arya's brief moment of pride vanished, replaced by an even deeper embarrassment that quickly turned into frustration and stress. She shouted angrily, turning away from him. She yelled a quick "thank you" for the new clothes and announced that she was going to change immediately. As she ran into the other room, Inori smiled to himself, wondering where that heartless doll he'd heard about had gone. A little while later, Arya came back out. Despite her foul mood, she sat down feeling as though the whole situation was a total failure. How had her life come to this? She figured he just wanted her to be ready for anything. Her gaze drifted to a fire burning in the distance, which she realized was coming from the palace. Lost in thought, she muttered that she'd had to abandon her country and its people. Maybe she thought this was the punishment she deserved. Just then, Inori came up behind her. Having overheard her, he asked if being with him was truly a punishment. Startled, she whipped around and yelled his name. Arya shouted, not having expected him to be there. Inori dryly commented on her rude behavior, to which she replied that she just couldn't understand him at all. "But I am grateful that you saved me," she finally admitted. "Are you really?" he asked. "Yes," she yelled, trying to calm herself down. She noted that even if he had to give up his humanity to save her, he seemed to have no regrets. Inori simply told her that everything was fine. He then explained that he needed to run a few tests and required her help. Overjoyed at the chance to be useful, Arya eagerly exclaimed that she would be happy to help. Inori opened his system window, explaining that he'd acquired many new skills from the people at the palace, but there were some he couldn't level up by himself. Puzzled, Arya asked, "You need my help with your skills." Inori confirmed that yes, he needed her help with his intimacy-related techniques. A horrified Arya asked him what on earth he was talking about. He replied bluntly that he wanted to test whether or not touching a woman's breasts would help level up his skill. Arya shouted angrily for him to stop, but Inori just asked if she even wanted to touch him. This awkward, forced romantic atmosphere was worse than just being together normally. Arya yelled back that the very thought of touching him was abnormal, and that it shouldn't be happening. Inori pressed her, asking why she had helped him then. Flustered, Arya raised a hand and shouted that he was a demon. After that, he checked his stats. His archery and bamboo pole mastery were both at level 1. His spear and shield skills were also at level 1. Cooking, cleaning, and laundry were at level 3, while sewing and mental calculation were at level 2. Other skills like poison resistance and burn resistance were at level 1, along with poker face and fake smile. They were all at level 1. As Inori studied the stats in his system window, he realized he hadn't yet figured out where all these abilities would be useful. Still, he knew he would have to improve at least one of them little by little. He turned to Arya and asked her to come down for a minute. She flew down, remarking that it was easy, thanks to her wonderful new abilities. Inori mused on how quickly she had learned to fly. He also wondered if she liked her new clothes. He could always change them if needed. Arya smiled and said they were fine, as the clothes were light and loose. Inori watched her silently. He couldn't stop thinking about how she was flying around so easily when she should have been in hiding. Wasn't she worried about the sun god's wrath? Deciding to test her, he held out his sword. "Let's see you swing this." Arya gave him a questioning look, but obliged. "Okay." When she took the sword, she lifted it and marveled at how beautiful it was, pointing out the magical rays it was emitting. "Did you make this yourself?" she asked. Inori explained that it was the Aeon sword, which was formerly the invincible longsword. He had upgraded it using dark magic. Hearing this, Arya was left speechless and gasped in surprise. Inori added that it was now called the Extremely Black Longsword, or something to that effect. For short, it was basically just a black sword. Arya inspected the weapon carefully. "I see," she said, "so this is what the captain was fighting with. Where did you get it?" He replied that he'd gotten it from them. She recalled that they had tried to use the sword, but when they did, nothing happened. Because of that, they believed they didn't possess even a shred of this world's magical power, which is why the sword wouldn't work for them. "So does that mean they can't use any magical tools at all?" Arya asked. Inori figured that was probably the case, and was why they were blaming him. "As soon as I picked it up, I understood," Inori explained. "Somehow I was able to learn how to use it." Arya smiled at that. She asked, "Are you completely confident in yourself? What happens now that you're becoming more powerful than they are?" Inori passionately told her not to worry, explaining that his power didn't rely on toys like that sword. "Besides," he added, "if we want a true measure of our strength, we'll have to fight without any weapons. Right, Arya?" "Who knows?" she replied coyly. Inori stood up, touching a nearby tree. "All right, let's assess our current situation." He began, "I can use magic and magical tools from another world, but I haven't honed my skills the way you have." Arya continued the thought. "And on the other hand, I can't use magic or magical tools, but I am constantly growing my own skills and polishing my abilities. So who do you think is stronger? Maybe we should have a little competition to find out." Inori replied that the answer would always be him because he was constantly getting stronger. Arya laughed and asked, "Oh, really? And what's that supposed to mean?" Inori turned to her, looking confused. "What are you talking about?" Arya opened her mouth and pointed to her sharp teeth. "Oh, I see," Inori said, getting it instantly. "You get stronger by drinking blood. So your new powers aren't just about the wings." Arya looked pleased. "I tried drinking some blood recently, and I could feel myself getting stronger," she explained. Inori decided to tease her. "So," he asked jokingly, "who was your first sweet kiss with? Was it that big bird demon?" She just gave him a blank stare before walking off. "Well," Inori said to himself, "now that we've got that sorted out, we can move on." "Were you really just waiting for me to get free this whole time?" Arya asked. Suddenly a voice from behind them said, "The hero was indeed waiting for that." It was Fenrir. He added that if the hero had been revived any sooner, he would have already finished them off. Inori turned to him and said not to worry. "I decided to sacrifice some of Ion's body parts to create a diversion. "I just didn't expect it to cause so much damage," he admitted. Meanwhile, Arya was looking at Fenrir with stars in her eyes. She squealed, "Who is this fluffy little creature?" Inori introduced him. "This is Fenrir, the guardian of the forest." Arya thought he was the cutest thing ever and scooped him up into a tight hug. Suddenly, Fenrir yelled angrily, telling her to stop. He demanded that she put him down. "This is what he's like now," Inori explained. "But he used to be a very dangerous beast." Fenrir promptly disappeared by sinking into the ground. "Looks like he just ran away from you," Inori noted. From the ground, Fenrir's voice shot back that he didn't remember being called that. Arya looked upset and asked if he was ever going to come back. Inori just looked at her quietly for a moment. Then he asked, "So you like animals?" He replied that he wasn't sure, but she had to take care of her sister's disruptive pets. Inori, understanding the situation, suggested they leave that very evening. Arya then asked him if he had set any goals for himself. Inori replied that he hadn't yet. He felt he wasn't done with this world and wanted to learn more. He wanted to travel to neighboring countries, perhaps starting with nations where heroes hadn't been summoned. Arya replied that no such countries exist. At these words, the hero turned in shock and looked at her with surprise. Arya continued explaining that there isn't a single country that doesn't recognize heroes. The hero was so surprised he yelled, "Wait, for real, there's not one country like that?" "That's right, not a one," she replied. According to the agreement, all 12 countries were required to summon 3 heroes each. Inori tried to process this, wondering if those numbers seemed a bit high. Apparently not. Arya didn't respond. In this world, there were 33 heroes living across 11 different countries. As she recalled the profiles of various heroes from neighboring lands, Arya looked at Sky and had a realization. When they arrived, they discovered a world of wizards, beastkin elves, dwarves, and even dragonoids. Sometime later, a terrible war broke out, which caught the eye of a powerful creature. A man named Chris, along with several of his assistants, took charge of the front lines. He was fighting the current Demon King Ignova. He closed his eyes and then someone shouted, "It's the Demon King Lord Ignova!" Sometime later, on a clear sunny day, Arya went to a crowded public square. One of the vendors she knew approached her and offered her some bread. He wanted to thank her because she had helped him out once before, so he gave her the bread as a token of his gratitude. Arya thanked him for his generosity and picked up her large bag. A smiling onlooker asked, "Are you sure you can carry that all by yourself?" Arya looked over at Sky. It had been a long time since she'd been in a provincial city of the Lin theocracy. It was a small trading town, distinguished by its wide brick roads. She was surprised at how lively it was compared to her home country, especially since her nation was a theocracy. Back home, priests played a major role in society. And even in this small town, there was a huge church. To earn some money, he registered with the local guild. Inori was also going by the pseudonym Kiri. However, since Inori sleeps all day, Arya has to do all the work by herself. On the bright side, this gave her the chance to meet many interesting people. When Arya got home, she went to find Inori and let him know she was back. But suddenly he lurched forward and collapsed, tumbling down the stairs. The impact shattered the stairs, splattering them with blood. He cried out for help, leaving Arya scared and completely confused about what was happening. It turned out to be the work of an unknown girl who laughed and remarked that it was surprising he was still conscious after her attack. Arya stood there in shock, still holding her bags, with no idea what to do. The girl kept laughing, commenting on his potential, even though he's just a lowly human. She mused, "I find him very interesting." She is a holy warrior from the Lin theocracy and a devoted follower of a being named Raskos. She declared that she needed to make him her disciple to lead him back to the right path. She then grabbed his tie and pulled him towards her, causing a surprised Inori to ask what was going on. Arya was amazed by everything she was seeing. This was her first city, her first job, and these were her first real encounters. And just like that, her life outside her home country began. After joining the Adventurers Guild under the name Kiri, he immediately started chugging alcohol, causing everyone around him to stare. He continued to drink nonstop. Eventually, the waitress came over and asked when he planned on settling his tab. He casually replied that as usual, she should just put it on Arya's bill. Meanwhile, the ever-diligent Arya worked hard on guild missions, gradually earning promotions and the nickname Black Rose Arya. In short, people called her that because of her black hair, black clothes, and her incredible skill at defeating demons. It seems she's already become quite popular with some of the locals. He, on the other hand, is so lost in his hatred for God and his son that all he does is sit around and drink. A man at a nearby table wondered aloud why the famous Black Rose would ever live with someone like that. Another man chimed in, guessing that he must be blackmailing her. At that moment, Ignova, who was sitting at the same table, asked him if he ever considered getting a job. "That girl works all day while you just sit here drinking." Inori told him to mind his own business and leave him alone. This old man was his only drinking partner in the entire guild. They often drank together. Ignova used to drink alone, but now he sits with Inori. Clearly, he has plenty of free time on his hands, too. Back in the day, if someone had asked him why he drank so much, he would have claimed he was gathering intel from local adventurers. He would also say it was a method for improving his skills and poison resistance. But over time, people began to doubt that excuse, given the sheer volume he drank, and now only this old man remains. He couldn't get any intel from him, but hey, at least it was good for improving his stamina, which he appreciated. Suddenly, the bell above the door jingled as someone entered. It was the holy warrior Fauna, and she was smiling. Inori turned around surprised and asked what a holy warrior was doing in a dive like this. She waved at him and asked if he'd like to join them for a drink. Ignova shot back, telling her to mind her own business and not to say such things. Fauna approached him, calling him brother, and warning that so much drinking is very harmful to the body and soul, and that everything should be done in moderation. Inori noticed a mark on her forehead and was intrigued. Since he couldn't see it clearly from where he was, he wondered if he could get a closer look. As he reached out to touch it, Fauna suddenly moved away, explaining that it was a symbol of her faith in God and he shouldn't touch it without permission. Inori was surprised when she suddenly started screaming at him. Meanwhile, Arya was heading their way carrying a bag full of food. The people nearby watched the scene unfold quietly, and Inori began to wonder if he had said something wrong. Suddenly, Fauna attacked him, slamming his head onto the ground. He lay there, looking up at the sky in complete surprise. As Arya got closer, she was surprised to see Fauna cupping Inori's face in her hands, and she started walking toward them. The crowd cheered at Inori's misfortune, yelling that this was the proper way to treat a drunk who had been sitting around drinking all day. "Teach him how to live," they shouted. Fauna smiled and replied that of course she would. She doesn't leave anyone behind. "Everything is done in the name of God," she declared. After speaking, she turned to the surprised Arya and asked what was wrong. Arya struggled to find her words, but finally managed to ask, "What are you planning to do with him?" Fauna effortlessly hoisted Inori over her shoulders. With his head hanging limply, Arya asked again, "What are you going to do with him?" "He's just a misbehaving boy who is trying to join the guild," she explained. "Don't worry," Fauna said. "He still has some potential left in him. God and I will teach him a lesson." With that, Fauna carried Inori away. She started walking off in an unknown direction. Arya watched in utter bewilderment, unsure of what she should do. The people in the crowd started cheering, happily congratulating her on finally being free of him. They even suggested that she spend some time with them now. Arya ignored the strangers, picked up her bag from the ground, and let out a loud shout of frustration. With that, she started running after Inori and Fauna, leaving the surprised crowd staring after her. They wondered why she was still chasing him, assuming he must have been blackmailing her. A short time later, Fauna brought Inori to the church and laid him on a bench outside. Just then, he regained consciousness, wondering what the heck was going on. Fauna held her hand out toward him and announced that she would heal him immediately. A bright, magical aura washed over Inori, its color shifting from blue to green. Shocked and curious, he began to examine his body. "See, it worked," Fauna said. "You really shouldn't drink so much again." He apologized and asked who she was. She replied that she was a holy warrior, to which he asked, "For real?" Fauna replied that he could call her master or just use her name, whichever he preferred, but she said that would have to wait for now. She took his hand and led him along, saying she first needed to deal with Arya, who was watching them from around a corner. Arya's eyes narrowed as she saw them holding hands. It reminded her of something, and she scowled angrily. She wondered if any of this was normal. That girl looked incredibly dangerous. Arya called out to Fender, who told her he wasn't sure if his master had realized it yet, but he had felt a divine blessing coming from Arya herself. Arya asked what he was talking about. Fender clarified that his master Fauna had also felt the blessing on Arya and had decided to follow her because of it. Fender replied with confidence that this was the absolute truth. Meanwhile, Fauna led Inori by the hand, explaining that this was the largest church in the entire area and that he was very lucky to be here today. Incredibly lucky, he thought with a wry smile, before quietly asking for her name. She said it was Fauna, and he introduced himself as Kiri, before noticing a huge statue in the middle of the church. His mouth hung open in surprise as he asked what it was. She replied that it was a statue of God. She explained that if he didn't know how to pray properly, he should just copy what she did. You press your 5 fingers together. She instructed 1 for God and 4 for the goddesses. Then close your eyes and pray. Inori did exactly as he was told. He thought to himself that he didn't understand how any of this was happening, but it was probably for the best not to argue with Saint Fauna. He realized that thinking back, he had never really believed in anything or worshipped anyone before in his life. Suddenly he felt a strange sensation. He remained quiet and continued the prayer, but then he felt someone's attention fall upon him. Inori immediately became alert. He didn't understand this feeling. It was as if someone was observing him intently, and he wondered if there was some kind of connection. He was sure it wasn't his imagination, so who could it be? His own senses gave him no clues. It didn't feel like any magic from this world, nor was it a physical phenomenon. It felt as if something was peering directly into his very soul. He angrily gritted his teeth, thinking, "Who dares to touch me without permission?" He mentally shouted for whatever it was to leave him alone. Suddenly, in the room directly above him, a bright light flashed as if in direct response to his defiance. Fauna looked at him surprised. She hadn't expected him to become so completely absorbed in the prayer. To convince himself, he mused that there must be nothing more wonderful than prayer. He was overjoyed that his mind was now focused on a task and decided to proceed. Inori quietly turned back to the statue, examining it more carefully. This time, however, he couldn't feel any connection to it. However, he had now taken an interest in this mysterious power. He resolved that someday he would return. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a goddess who felt a connection to Inori asked her companion if he had severed the link. The other goddess replied that she hadn't expected anyone to be able to do such a thing. The spark of this event spread from the planet out into the universe. Sometime later, Inori appeared at the bar again, immediately drawing everyone's attention. He looked over at his table where Ignoa was sitting and asked if he was still alone. Ignoa looked at him and commented that he'd certainly improved his appearance. Inori, however, looked absolutely disgusting. His face was covered in numerous scratches and caked in blood. He explained that he'd been a bit unlucky, which prompted Fauna to decide to use magic. She swung a punch right at his face. He tried to stop her, but she just continued beating him relentlessly. Inori realized she wasn't called a fanatic for nothing. She was a holy warrior. Her attacks were causing him unbearable pain. This was because a strike imbued with the power of a holy warrior contained light, a vampire's primary weakness. Fauna beat him up, yelling that she'd felt his leering eyes on her at the bar, and that he probably regretted his body being unable to keep up with her. In that moment, he realized she had been watching everything. Fauna kept shouting that it was fine, she would just keep beating him until he finally paid for his actions. He decided that if he could just understand her method, he could move forward. But Inori conceded that this wasn't working and suggested she stop and rest as she was already pushing herself past her limit. Nearby, Arya was trying to hide behind a tree. She was wondering if she should interfere. Fenrir, who was also nearby, reminded her that the master had instructed them to interfere only in extremely serious cases. He added that Inori could run during the day, but if he chose not to, it was just his bad luck. There had to be a purpose to his actions they couldn't understand. Arya watched quietly until she saw Inori finally run away. He was now back at the bar, explaining the situation to his friend Ignoa. Ignoa sadly said that he understood everything perfectly. At last, he had escaped. This was probably the best moment of his life, a desperate escape. Ignoa confirmed that it wasn't easy, and that, by the way, the girl turned out to be a holy warrior. Holy warriors are people who kill demons and demonic creatures, offering them as sacrifices to their god. The majority of them use magical weapons and fight with the power of light, which is incredibly effective against demons. Ignoa lowered his eyes. He said that while it's important to know your opponent's qualities, this was a matter of strategy. Since Inori doesn't know how to use magical weapons, there was no point in teaching him any tactics. Inori confirmed this, yelling that he didn't understand it either. Then he asked, "Wait, did you just say I'm a weapon?" Just then, Saint Fauna arrived at the bar. Seeing Inori, she pointed at him and declared that she had found him. She commented that he runs very fast, but now that he's rested, it was time to get back to training. Inori screamed in pain and pleaded with Ignoa for help. Fauna immediately grabbed him by the hair, dragged him along, and asked what they were going to do this time. But Ignoa didn't come to his aid, prompting Inori to keep shouting, "Aren't we friends?" Ignoa remained seated, doing nothing. After a while, Fauna dragged Inori into the forest and threw him to the ground. They continued to beat him like this during his training. He was troubled by the fact that he was unable to register for something during the daytime. But if he did nothing, there would be nothing left of him. So he suggested they go to the church again. Upon arriving, Fauna was ecstatic. She said she'd never imagined he would request to go to church on his own. His training was clearly paying off. Inori also acted happy and accepted his guru's advice. He thought about how he had managed to avoid training and figured he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone by going to the church. This resulted in his fake smile skill improving and reaching another level. It seemed he actually liked grinding at church. However, he had no special attachment to religion itself, and unlike before, he no longer felt like anyone was observing him. Were other devotees also connected? Given that his attempt to establish a link had failed, perhaps the powers of this world simply couldn't comprehend such a phenomenon. What would happen if he used an ability from his other world? He could evaluate every object in the room. Here, the devotees, their clothes, everything seemed odd. The ceiling, the floor, the statue, it all looked strange. Then he spotted something peculiar and wondered what it was. Looking closer, Inori realized he had found exactly what he was searching for. The system reported that he had found a secret light stone from the Rain Theocracy. Its value was unknown, and it was born from the roots of a divine tree. It acts as a medium for the goddess's powers and is a mandatory component in every church. Inori began to wonder, is this holy stone the medium for the goddess? If so, was this the same stone the church used to contact people? He wondered which goddess it was because the statue had 5 figures and theoretically there were 5 goddesses. He was afraid the goddesses of this world wouldn't be very pleased with him, but what's done is done. At least he learned something new, which was a plus. Suddenly, Fauna's whole body trembled and she collapsed with a scream. Inori, wondering what happened, noticed a man named Raven nearby. He stood and announced that he was Raven, the 4th commander of the Holy Knights and the hero of Reginan. Inori couldn't help but wonder if he was really a hero. A hero, Fauna explained that 10 years ago he had saved the city from evil demons and was still protecting it to this day. He was a living legend, and this was the first time she had ever seen him up close. She even wondered if he might be her master's boss. Fauna explained she was just going to greet him and apologize, but decided to head back first. They could meet up again in a bit. Inori said that was fine, and then started to use his assess skill. The hero of Ren City probably wasn't more powerful than Ion, but he needed to assess him as a precaution. Suddenly, Raven shot him a terrifying glare, looking right at him, making Inori realize he might have been spotted. Had he really seen the assessment, or was it just his imagination? Inori definitely felt something. It was too dangerous to try it on him again. As Raven was trying to figure out what was happening, the Holy Maiden approached him and called his name. Raven ignored her, sensing the scent of his own lineage in the room. As Inori left the room, Raven's eyes followed him. Suddenly, a loud explosion erupted outside, sending rocks flying everywhere. Arya, sitting on a roof, was observing the whole scene. She mused that Inori had been training non-stop ever since that day. She felt sad and bored because the two of them had barely spoken. Inori was currently training with Saintess Fauna. She informed him that he had gotten much more skilled at dodging magic and fighting against armed opponents. Inori thanked her for the compliment. He then thought about how Adriana had already made him painfully aware of the trouble they could cause. You can get into. Fauna noted that he was still focusing solely on defense and asked if he used any weapons. He asked, surprised. He had dark magic, but that wasn't something he could tell them. Fauna replied that she understood and then exclaimed that it was all decided. She suddenly clapped her hands together and suggested that Inori buy a weapon of his choice. She'd never heard of a traveler leaving on a journey completely empty-handed. Inori agreed. He would go, and Fauna added that she would also be busy for a while because she had finally gotten permission to meet Lord Raven. Inori congratulated her, thinking to himself that she had certainly worked hard for it. Fauna said it was time for her to go and then took her leave. After a moment, Inori decided he should probably buy a weapon. Even though he had his dark magic and technically didn't need a weapon, he figured it would be useful to have a simple one to maintain his cover. For appearance's sake, he headed to a weapon shop, where all sorts of armaments were on display. The shopkeeper welcomed him and asked what he was looking for. Inori replied that he was looking for something simple and practical. The shopkeeper showed him several options. There were swords, daggers, staves, and more. Inori carefully examined each weapon, wondering which one would be best for him. In the end, he chose a simple short sword that was light and easy to carry. The shopkeeper told him the price, and Inori paid. He took his new weapon and left the shop. He was now officially armed. Of course, he knew his real strength lay in his dark magic, but keeping up this appearance was necessary. He started walking back to his temporary lodgings. He wondered how the next few days would play out. With Fauna away, maybe he could find some peace and quiet to improve his skills even more. Arya had also been busy with her own missions for a while now, so maybe they could both relax a little.